This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still can't believe what happened to me last week. I've been trying to make sense of it, but I can't. Maybe writing it down will help, or maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I was driving back from visiting my sister in Cedar Rapids. The trip was supposed to take 5 hours, but I got a late start and then hit this insane rainstorm about halfway home. I'm talking biblical levels of water coming down. My windshield wipers couldn't keep up, and visibility was down to maybe 10 feet in front of my car. The rain had been going for about an hour when I noticed my gas light came on. I cursed myself for not filling up earlier when I had the chance. My GPS showed nothing nearby, and my phone signal was getting spotty in that rural stretch of highway. I was genuinely starting to worry about being stranded when I saw it through the curtain of rain, a dim, flickering neon sign on the right side of the road. Sunt Penis Mo L was all I could make out as I pulled into the gravel lot. Some of the letters were burnt out, but I figured it was Sunset Pines Motel. The place looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 70s. It was a single-story L-shaped building with maybe 10 rooms total. The office was at one end with a sad little office sign that flickered on and off in the storm. Paint was peeling off the wooden siding and the whole place had this abandoned feel. But there was a dim light on in the office, so I knew someone was there. I sat in my car for a minute debating. Everything about this place screamed, "Keep driving." But my gas light was on, the rain was getting worse, and it was already past midnight. I didn't have many options. I made a dash for the office, getting soaked in the process. The door had one of those bells that jingle when you open it. The inside was lit by a single lamp on a desk and smelled like cigarettes and something else I couldn't place, kind of musty and damp. The wallpaper was this faded floral pattern that was peeling at the edges, and there was an old tube TV in the corner playing static. I stood there dripping for maybe 30 seconds before an older woman emerged from a back room. She had to be in her 70s, with grey hair pulled back in a tight bun. What really unnerved me was her expression, or lack of one. Her face was completely blank, like a mannequin. Her eyes didn't seem to focus on me, even though she was looking right at me. "I need a room for the night," I said, trying to sound normal despite the creepy vibes. "Do you have anything available?" She didn't respond verbally. She just reached behind her to a board with keys hanging on hooks and grabbed one labeled 6. She placed it on the counter and slid it toward me. Do you need my ID or credit card?" I asked. She just stared through me. Not at me, through me. Like I wasn't even there. Then she turned and disappeared back into the room she'd come from. I stood there for a moment, completely weirded out, before grabbing the key. I told myself it was just a quirky local business that wasn't up on modern hotel practices. Maybe they'd charge me in the morning. I ran back to my car and drove to the far end of the L-shaped building where room 6 was located. It was the last room, right at the corner. As I was unlocking the door, I noticed these weird marks on the wooden door frame. They looked like scratches, deep ones, like someone had taken a knife or claws to the wood. 4 parallel lines, repeated in several spots. I told myself it was probably just normal wear and tear on an old building. The room itself wasn't any better than the office. It had that same peeling floral wallpaper, a queen-sized bed with a faded green bedspread, a dresser with a TV that looked even older than the one in the office, and a small bathroom. The carpet was worn thin in paths to the bed and bathroom. The whole place had a smell I can't quite describe. Musty, like old books, but with something else underneath. Something metallic, almost like blood, but fainter. I was exhausted from driving and just wanted to sleep, but something about that room felt wrong. The walls seemed too close, the ceiling too low. It felt like the space was somehow smaller than it should have been. I tried to brush it off as travel fatigue and the creepiness of being in a strange place during a storm. I took a quick shower in the bathroom, which had rust stains in the tub and a dripping faucet that wouldn't shut off completely. I didn't unpack, just grabbed my toiletries and phone charger. I plugged in my phone and saw I had no service at all now. Great. The bed creaked when I sat on it, and the mattress sagged in the middle. I turned on the TV, hoping for some background noise, but it only picked up 2 channels, both showing infomercials with terrible static. I turned it off and tried to sleep. I don't know if it was the unfamiliar surroundings or my growing anxiety, but I couldn't drift off. I lay there listening to the rain hammering on the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. The digital clock on the nightstand read 1:15, then 1:45, then 2. I must have started to doze because I remember jerking awake suddenly at 2:14 a.m. according to that clock. That's when I heard it. A scratching sound at the door. At first it was so faint I thought it might be a tree branch or something blown by the wind, but there weren't any trees close to that side of the building. The scratching continued, becoming more rhythmic. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Pause. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering in my chest. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. The scratching stopped for a moment, then started again, louder this time, more deliberate, like whatever was making the sound now knew I was awake and listening. I reached for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The scratching continued, now moving up and down the door in long, slow strokes. It sounded exactly like fingernails or claws dragging against the wood. I was fully awake now, adrenaline coursing through me. Then I heard a different sound, the metal doorknob slowly turning. I had locked the door, I was sure of it, but the knob was turning anyway. I watched in horror as it rotated all the way and the door began to open, just a crack at first. That's when I saw it. A hand, a pale skeletal hand with impossibly long fingers and cracked yellowish nails gripping the edge of the door. The skin was stretched so tight over the bones that I could see every knuckle, every tendon. The fingers were too long to be human, the joints bent at unnatural angles. I wanted to scream but couldn't make a sound. I was frozen, watching as the door opened wider and a face appeared in the gap. I will never forget that face as long as I live. It was barely human, skin like parchment stretched over a skull, with hollow sockets where the eyes should be. But there was something in those sockets, a dull red glow, like embers in a dying fire. The mouth was the worst part, stretched into a grin that was too wide, revealing teeth that were long and pointed. It just stared at me, that grin never wavering. Then it began to push the door open further, and I saw its body, emaciated, with limbs that were too long and bent at odd angles, like a spider. It was wearing what looked like the remains of a nightgown, yellowed with age and stained with something dark. That's when my survival instinct finally kicked in. I bolted for the bathroom, slamming and locking the flimsy door behind me. I could hear it entering the room, those long nails scratching against the walls and furniture. It moved slowly, deliberately, like it had all the time in the world. "Please," I whispered, though I don't know who I was talking to. "Please." It came to the bathroom door. I could see the shadow of its feet in the gap beneath the door. 2 long bony feet, standing perfectly still. Then the scratching started again, right at my eye level. Scratch, scratch, scratch. For hours it stayed there, occasionally trying the doorknob, occasionally scratching. Sometimes it would go quiet for so long I thought it might have left, but then the scratching would start again, or I'd hear a soft wheezing sound like labored breathing. I sat on the bathroom floor, back against the tub, clutching my phone like a lifeline, even though it was useless without service. The battery was at 15%. I turned it off to save power in case I needed it later. I don't know when I passed out from exhaustion and fear. The next thing I knew, light was streaming through the small bathroom window. The storm had passed. There was no sound from the other side of the door. I waited another 30 minutes before gathering the courage to open the bathroom door. The room was empty. Everything looked normal. No scratches on the walls, no sign that anything had been there. Even the door to the hallway was closed and locked just as I'd left it. I grabbed my stuff and got out of there as fast as I could. I didn't stop at the office, didn't look for the woman. I just threw my bag in the car and peeled out of that gravel lot. As I pulled onto the highway, I glanced in my rearview mirror one last time. The motel's sign was fully lit now in the morning sun. It clearly read, Sunset Pines Motel, but beneath that, where it had previously said, vacancy, it now read, no vacancy. I drove until I found a gas station 20 miles down the road. When I mentioned the Sunset Pines to the cashier, he looked at me strangely and said there wasn't any motel by that name in the area. I insisted, telling him exactly where it was. He just shook his head and said that stretch of road had been empty for years. I've tried looking up the Sunset Pines Motel online since then. Nothing. It's like it doesn't exist. But I know what I saw. I know what happened in room 6, and I can still hear that scratching sound when I try to sleep at night. Story 2. I still can't sleep right. It's been 3 months since that night at Shadow House, and I keep replaying everything in my head. I've been seeing a therapist twice a week, but they think I'm making it all up, or that I'm having some kind of psychotic break. Nobody believes me about what happened. How could they? 5 teenagers disappeared without a trace, and I'm the only one who made it out. I guess I should start from the beginning. I'm Emily, 17 years old, and I used to live in Ravenhollow, this tiny speck of a town in the Pacific Northwest where nothing ever happens. Or at least, that's what I thought before that night in October. Shadow House had always been there, sitting at the edge of town, half hidden by those twisted pine trees that grew all around it. The house was this massive Victorian mansion that never seemed to catch any light. Even on the brightest days, it looked like it was perpetually in shadow. Growing up, our parents always warned us to stay away. There were stories about people going missing, about strange lights in the windows at night, even though the place had been abandoned for decades. It was Tom's idea to go there. Tom Reynolds, my boyfriend since freshman year. He was always looking for some kind of thrill, something to break up the monotony of small-town life. We were all hanging out at Jake's place that Friday night, me, Tom, Jake, Melissa, and Zach, just drinking beers that Jake's older brother had bought us, complaining about how boring our lives were. We should do something crazy tonight, Tom said, that familiar glint in his eye. Something we'll remember forever. I should have known right then. I should have said no. Like what? Melissa asked, already excited. She was always up for Tom's stupid ideas. Shadow House, he said, and the room went quiet. Come on, we've lived here our whole lives, and none of us have ever had the guts to go inside. It's just an old house. There's a reason nobody goes there, I said. I'd always felt uneasy about that place. When I was little, I swear I saw something, watching me from one of the upstairs windows when my mom drove past it. It's Halloween season, Tom pressed. When else are we going to do it? I wish I could go back to that moment. I wish I'd been stronger, that I'd convinced them all it was a bad idea, but I didn't want to be the scared girlfriend, so I went along with it. We took Jake's car and drove out there around 11 that night. The road to Shadow House was overgrown, barely visible in the headlights. Jake had to park about a quarter-mile away because the path became too narrow for his car. The walk to the house was eerily quiet. No crickets, no rustling leaves, even though there was definitely a breeze. The trees around the property were all wrong, twisted in ways trees shouldn't grow, their branches reaching towards the house like they were being pulled by something. "This is so creepy," Melissa whispered, clutching Zach's arm. Her voice sounded too loud in the silence. The house loomed ahead of us, 3 stories of rotting Victorian architecture. Even in the darkness, I could make out the detailed woodwork on the porch, the ornate shutters hanging crookedly from the windows. It was like the house was decaying but somehow still preserved, frozen in time. "I can't believe we're doing this," Jake muttered, but he followed Tom up the crumbling steps to the porch. The front door was this massive oak thing with a tarnished brass knocker shaped like a woman's face, her mouth open in what looked like a scream. Tom tried the handle, and to all of our surprise, the door swung open with barely a creak. "No way it should open that easily after all these years," I said, my stomach knotting with dread. "Maybe someone's been here recently," Zach suggested, but none of us really believed that. We stepped inside, the floorboards groaning beneath our feet. The air was thick with dust and something else, a sweet rotting smell that made my throat close up. Tom switched on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness to reveal a grand foyer with a sweeping staircase. Dusty crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the walls were lined with portraits in heavy frames. "Check out these creepy-ass paintings," Jake said, shining his phone light on one of them, a stern-looking man in Victorian clothes. I swear to God, as the light hit the portrait, the man's eyes shifted slightly to look directly at us. I gasped and grabbed Tom's arm. "What?" he asked. "That painting, it moved. Its eyes moved." "You're imagining things," Tom said, but he didn't sound convinced. He played it cool, but I could feel his arm tense under my grip. We moved deeper into the house, into what must have been the parlor. Antique furniture covered in yellowed sheets, a massive fireplace with intricate carvings of faces and creatures along the mantel, and there, on a small table in the center of the room, was an old wooden board. "No way," Melissa breathed, rushing over to it. "It's a Ouija board." The board looked ancient, the wood dark and polished from years of use. The letters and numbers were hand-painted in faded gold, and the planchette was carved from what looked like bone. "We have to try it," Zach said, already sitting down at the table. "Are you insane?" I hissed. "We shouldn't mess with that thing, especially not here." "Come on, Em," Tom said, pulling me toward the table. "It's just a game. What are you so afraid of?" Everything about this was wrong. The board shouldn't have been there, set up like it was waiting for us. But I sat down with them, my hands shaking as we all placed our fingertips lightly on the planchette. "Is anyone here with us?" Tom asked, his voice echoing slightly in the empty room. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the planchette moved. Not the slow, uncertain movement you get when people are pushing it, but a sudden, deliberate slide across the board. Leave. "Very funny," I said, glaring at Tom. "Who's pushing it?" "It's not me," he said, his face pale in the flashlight beam. NOW. The planchette was moving faster now, our fingers barely keeping up with it. NOTSAFE. The temperature in the room plummeted. I could see my breath clouding in front of my face. The chandelier above us began to sway slightly, dust raining down from the ceiling. "Guys, we should go," I said, my voice trembling. "Wait," Tom said, leaning forward. "Who are you? What's not safe?" "YOUARETRAPPED. As the planchette spelled out the last letter, the chandelier crashed down, missing our table by inches. Glass shattered across the floor, and we all jumped up, screaming. That's when I heard it. Whispers coming from the walls, too faint to make out the words, but definitely voices. "Let's get out of here," Jake yelled, already heading for the door. We ran back to the foyer, but something was wrong. The entrance hall seemed longer than before, the front door much further away than it should have been, and the portraits, all of their eyes were following us now, their faces contorted into expressions of warning or malice. Tom reached the door first and yanked on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "It's locked," he shouted, panic edging into his voice. "It won't open." "There has to be another way out," Melissa said, her voice high with fear. We turned back, planning to look for another exit, when I noticed something horrible. The walls of the hallway were slowly moving inward, the space narrowing around us. And the shadows, they were wrong. They weren't matching our movements anymore. They were stretching, forming shapes that looked almost human, but not quite, with too many limbs, too long fingers. "Tom!" I screamed as one of the shadow figures reached out from the wall behind him. He turned, but it was too late. The shadow wrapped around his ankle and pulled. Tom fell hard, his flashlight skittering across the floor. He clawed at the floorboards, his fingers leaving marks in the dust as he was dragged backward toward the wall. "Help me!" he screamed, reaching for us. Jake and Zach lunged for him, grabbing his hands, but the shadow was stronger. It pulled Tom into the wall, not against it, but into it, like the wall had become liquid. One moment he was there, his face contorted in terror, and the next he was gone, the wall solid once more. We ran. What else could we do? We ran deeper into the house, looking for any way out. The whispers grew louder, surrounding us, and the shadows moved like living things, reaching for us as we passed. We lost Jake next. We were running up the main staircase when the step beneath him simply disappeared. He fell through, his scream cutting off abruptly as the wood sealed back over him as if he'd never been there. Melissa, Zach, and I made it to the second floor, but the house kept changing around us. Doorways appeared and disappeared. Hallways stretched impossibly long or curved in ways that defied physics. "There's a window!" Zach shouted, pointing to the end of one hallway. We ran toward it, but the hallway kept extending, the window never getting any closer. And then Melissa wasn't with us anymore. I didn't see what happened. One moment she was running beside me, and the next she was gone. Not even a scream to mark her disappearance. Zach and I found ourselves in what looked like a child's bedroom. Dolls with cracked porcelain faces arranged in a circle on the floor. The door slammed shut behind us, and when I turned to look, it had vanished completely, leaving only blank wall. "What is this place?" Zach whispered, his voice breaking. Before I could answer, the floorboards beneath his feet splintered. Hands, actual human hands, reached up through the broken wood and grabbed him. I tried to hold on to him, but there were too many of them, pulling him down into the darkness below the floor. His face is the last thing I remember. The absolute terror in his eyes as he was pulled under. And then I was alone. The house had gone completely silent. No more whispers, no creaking wood, nothing. Just me and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I wandered through the house for what felt like hours, opening doors that led to impossible rooms, a ballroom filled with dancing shadows, a kitchen where all the knives floated in midair, a bathroom where the tub was filled with what looked like black oil that moved on its own. Finally, I found a small room at the end of a narrow hallway. The walls were covered in symbols that glowed with a faint blue light, symbols I'd never seen before but somehow understood were ancient and powerful. And there, on the far wall, hung a cracked mirror in an ornate silver frame. I approached it cautiously, my reflection distorted by the cracks, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't showing my reflection at all. Instead, I saw my friends, Tom, Jake, Melissa, and Zach, standing together in what looked like the foyer of the house, but everything was wrong. The colors were inverted, the shadows were light, and they were calling to me, their mouths moving but no sound coming out. I reached out to touch the mirror. I don't know why I did it, some instinct I couldn't fight. The surface rippled like water under my fingertips, and then something grabbed my wrist from the other side. I was pulled forward, the glass enveloping me like liquid mercury, cold and suffocating. I don't remember anything after that. I woke up in the woods nearly a mile from where Shadow House had stood, covered in a black tar-like substance that disappeared within minutes of me waking up. It was morning, the sun just rising. When I made it back to town and told people what had happened, a search party was formed. But when they reached the location of Shadow House, there was nothing there. No house, no foundation, just a large patch of blackened earth where nothing grows. Friends were never found. Their families still blame me, think I know more than I'm saying. The police questioned me for weeks, but eventually ruled it as a tragic case of teenagers wandering into the woods at night and getting lost. But I know what happened. Sometimes, I still hear the whispers at night. And sometimes, when I look in mirrors, I see them watching me from the other side, their eyes pleading for help I can't give. Shadow House is gone, but I don't think we escaped it. I think part of it is still inside me, waiting. And I'm terrified of what happens when it decides to finish what it started. Story 3. I've been driving rigs for 27 years now. I've seen pretty much everything the road can throw at you. Blizzards that turn highways into ice skating rinks, wildlife darting across the road at night. Even had my fair share of hallucinations from driving too many hours straight. But what happened to me last month on Highway 97 in Oregon, I still can't explain it. I'm writing this down because I need to tell someone, and my wife is tired of seeing me wake up in cold sweats. It was a Tuesday night in late October. I was hauling a load of electronics to Seattle, nothing unusual. The weather had been nasty earlier, heavy rain that had finally let up around 10 at night. I was making good time, hoping to push through to Bend before stopping, but my eyelids kept getting heavier. Any trucker worth his salt knows when it's time to pull over, and I was definitely at that point. Around midnight, I spotted the lights of a truck stop just off the highway. Wasn't one I recognized, but Highway 97 isn't my usual route. The sign was partially lit. Pine Ridge Truck Stop, with some of the letters flickering. Nothing unusual about that. These places aren't exactly known for their maintenance. I pulled off the highway, tires crunching on wet gravel. First thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Usually these places have some life to them, even at midnight. Idling engines, maybe some country music drifting from someone's cab. But here, nothing but the sound of my own rig. The parking lot had about 8 or 9 semis parked in neat rows, but no cars. That should have been my first warning sign. As I pulled in, my headlights swept across the trucks, and I noticed they were all covered in a layer of dust. Not road dust, the kind that builds up when something hasn't moved in weeks. Even in the dim light, I could see it. I parked near the building, away from the other trucks. When I killed the engine, the silence felt heavy, like something physical pressing against my eardrums. I sat there for a minute, feeling uneasy, but telling myself I was just tired. 27 years on the road, and I've never been the jumpy type. The place looked open. Lights were on inside, though dimmer than they should have been. I grabbed my wallet and phone, then hesitated before taking my flashlight too. Just a habit from years on the road, I told myself. The moment my boots hit the pavement, I felt it, that sensation of being watched. I glanced around, but there was nothing but those dust-covered trucks and the dim building ahead. The air felt wrong somehow, too still and way too cold for October. As I approached the building, I noticed the windows were all fogged up from the inside, not like condensation from a busy diner, but a thick film that made it impossible to see through. The neon "open" sign buzzed and flickered, casting an unnatural red glow across the wet pavement. I pushed open the door, and a little bell jingled above me. That normal sound in this abnormal place made me jump. The smell hit me immediately. Stale air, old grease, and something else I couldn't place. Something wrong. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded flat, like the room was swallowing the sound. The place was set up like any truck stop diner. Counter with stools to the right, booths, lining the windows to the left. But what made my skin crawl was the food. Every table had plates with half-eaten meals, cups of coffee, some still with steam rising from them. Like everyone had just up and vanished mid-bite. I moved toward the counter, my boots squeaking on the linoleum. No one behind the register. The kitchen area visible through the pass-through window was empty, but I could see a spatula resting on a grill, grease congealed around it. That's when I heard it. A whisper, so faint I thought I'd imagined it. I froze, straining to hear. "Hello? Anyone working?" I called again, louder this time. The whisper came again, clearer now. Not words exactly, more like the sound of someone drawing breath to speak but never quite forming the words. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I should have left right then. Everything in my body was screaming at me to go, but 27 years of logic and routine doesn't vanish in an instant. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe someone was in the back, maybe the cook was in the bathroom. "I just need to fill up my rig," I said to the empty diner. "Anyone here?" The whispers grew louder as I moved deeper into the building, past the counter toward the restrooms. They weren't coming from any direction I could pinpoint. It was like they were inside my head, but I knew they weren't. I'd never experienced anything like it. That's when I noticed someone sitting in the farthest booth, back to me. A man in a trucker's jacket, completely motionless. Relief washed over me. Finally, another person. "Hey, buddy, you know if there's anyone working tonight?" I called out as I approached. No response, no movement. I got closer, close enough to see the man's gray hair poking out from under a faded cap. His hands were flat on the table, on either side of a plate of eggs and toast. Not eating, not moving, just sitting. "Sir, you okay?" I was about 10 feet away now, still nothing. Something made me look at the window beside the booth. It was fogged like the others, but there was a clear spot, like someone had wiped it with their hand. And in that clear spot, I could see the reflection of the booth. My blood turned to ice in my veins. In the reflection, the man wasn't sitting. He was standing, pressed against the glass from the other side. His face was distorted, eyes wide, mouth stretched open in what looked like a silent scream. But when I looked back at the booth, he was still sitting there, motionless. I stumbled backward, knocking into a chair that clattered to the floor. The sound echoed unnaturally loud in the empty diner. The whispers suddenly stopped. Complete silence fell. Then the man in the booth slowly began to turn. I didn't wait to see his face. Pure instinct took over, and I ran. Ran like I haven't run since I was a kid, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might burst. I slammed through the door, the bell jingling wildly above me. Outside, the air felt thick, resistant, like running through water. And the parking lot, God, the parking lot. Every single truck that had been empty now had someone sitting behind the wheel. Dark silhouettes, perfectly still, all facing forward. Not one of them moved. Not one of them looked my way. But I knew they were aware of me. I fumbled with my keys, dropped them, snatched them up with shaking hands. It took 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. The whole time, I couldn't stop looking at those trucks, expecting the doors to open, expecting those figures to come for me. My engine roared to life, and I threw the rig into gear, not even bothering with my seatbelt or lights. I reversed so fast I clipped the corner of the building, tearing off a piece of my fender. I didn't care. I just needed to get away. As I pulled back onto Highway 97, I risked one glance in my mirror. The truck stop looked exactly as it had when I arrived. Dim lights, dusty trucks parked in rows. But now I could see figures in every window of the diner pressed against the glass, watching me go. I drove like a madman, blowing past speed limits, praying I wouldn't encounter any cops. I didn't stop until I hit the next town, Chamalt, I think. Found a well-lit gas station with other trucks and actual living people. I pulled in and just sat there shaking for what felt like hours. When the sun came up, I convinced myself I'd hallucinated the whole thing. Sleep deprivation, stress, maybe something I ate. I decided to look for the truck stop on my way back in daylight to prove to myself it was just a normal place and I'd freaked myself out over nothing. 3 days later, heading south after my delivery, I kept my eyes peeled for Pine Ridge truck stop. I never found it. There was nothing at that stretch of highway but trees and rocky outcroppings. No turnoff, no building, nothing. When I got home, I started asking around. Checked online maps, trucker forums, even called the Oregon DOT. No record of any Pine Ridge truck stop on Highway 97. According to every official source, it doesn't exist. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. I mentioned it to an old-timer at a diner in Klamath Falls about a week later. He got real quiet, then told me there are stories among truckers about ghost stops that only appear to the unlucky. Places that vanished decades ago, but sometimes reappear for travelers who are too tired, too lonely, or somehow marked for something I don't want to think about. He told me to consider myself lucky I left when I did. Some don't. I've been driving with a partner since then. Don't care if it cuts into my pay. I don't drive Highway 97 anymore, and I don't stop at unfamiliar truck stops after dark. That place, whatever it was, showed me something I wasn't supposed to see. And sometimes, late at night when I'm drifting off to sleep, I hear those whispers again. Not words, never words, just the sound of someone trying desperately to warn me about something I still don't understand. Story 4. I still don't understand what happened to me last night. I'm writing this down partly to make sense of it, and partly because I can't stop shaking when I think about it. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar on Highway 57. I've been avoiding that road at night for years. There's just something about it that never felt right to me. It's this long stretch of nothing but darkness, with dense forest and swampland on either side. No streetlights, barely any houses, and your cell signal drops to nothing for most of the drive. Last night I was driving back from visiting my mom in the hospital 2 towns over. She had a minor surgery, nothing serious, but I stayed way longer than I planned. By the time I left, it was already past midnight, and I was completely exhausted. I'd been up since 5 in the morning for work, then drove straight to the hospital after my shift. My eyes were burning, and all I wanted was to get home and collapse into bed. I knew Highway 57 would save me at least 20 minutes compared to the main route, and in my tired state, that seemed worth it. Stupid decision. I remember thinking as I merged onto that empty road that it would be fine. Just keep the music loud, crack the window, and stay alert for deer. The moment I turned onto Highway 57, this feeling of unease settled over me. I've driven plenty of dark roads before, but this was different. The air felt heavy, like right before a massive storm hits. The moon was barely visible behind thick clouds, casting this weird grayish glow over everything. I turned up the heat because suddenly I was freezing, even though it was July and had been nearly 80 degrees all day. I remember checking my gas gauge, half tank, plenty to get home. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the yellow lines and not much else. The trees on either side of the road seemed to lean inward, creating this tunnel effect that made me feel claustrophobic. About 10 minutes in, I started feeling drowsy despite the cold air and loud music. I rolled down my window all the way, hoping the rush of air would help keep me awake. That's when I saw him for the first time. Just beyond the tree line, maybe 15 feet from the road, stood a man. He was tall, like unnaturally tall, and completely motionless. I only caught a glimpse of him as I drove past, but that glimpse was enough to make my skin crawl. He wasn't waving for help or trying to get my attention. He was just standing there, facing the road, watching. His face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel his eyes on me. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just some drunk guy who wandered out from a nearby property. Maybe a hunter setting up early, though hunting season was months away. Maybe just my tired brain playing tricks. I shook it off and focused on the road, turning up my music even louder to drown out my thoughts. A few minutes later, couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 miles down the road, I saw him again. This time he was standing right at the edge of the asphalt, his feet practically on the white line. I swerved instinctively, heart pounding in my chest. It was the same guy, I'm certain of it. Same height, same posture, same dark clothes. But that was impossible. I'd been driving at least 60 miles per hour with no turns or exits. There's no way he could have gotten ahead of me. As I sped past him, I looked in my rearview mirror, and what I saw still makes me feel sick. He was standing in the middle of the road, directly behind my car, facing my direction. He hadn't been there when I drove past. I would have hit him. It was like he materialized out of nowhere. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheels steady. I pushed the gas pedal all the way to the floor, watching the speedometer climb to 80, then 90. I kept checking my mirrors, terrified I'd see him again, somehow keeping pace with my car. I was so focused on looking behind me that I almost missed the car pulled over on the shoulder ahead. It was an old sedan with hazard lights blinking weakly. A woman stood beside it, waving frantically. My first instinct was to stop. I'm not the kind of person who leaves someone stranded, especially at night. But as I slowed down, I saw him again. He was standing behind her, maybe 5 feet away, close enough to reach out and touch her. but she kept waving at me, completely unaware of his presence. I could see her face clearly in my headlights. She looked desperate, scared of being alone on the highway. But she had no idea she wasn't alone. I sped up again, flying past her. I wanted to stop to warn her, but what would I even say? There's a man behind you that might not be human. And what if I was losing my mind? What if there was no man at all? The guilt of leaving her there still gnaws at me. I've been checking the local news all morning, terrified I'll see her face in a missing persons report or worse. Nothing so far, but that doesn't mean she's okay. About halfway through the highway, I spotted a rundown gas station with its lights still on. I hadn't remembered there being any gas stations on this stretch, but I wasn't about to question a safe haven. I pulled in so fast, I nearly scraped the side of my car on the concrete barrier. The place looked ancient. Faded signs, cracked concrete, and only two pumps that looked like they belonged in the 70s. The fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered, but they were the most comforting sight I'd seen all night. I sat in my car for a minute, trying to calm down enough to go inside. My hands wouldn't stop trembling, and I could feel sweat soaking through my shirt despite the cold. When I finally went in, there was only one employee, an old guy with a gray beard and deep-set eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. He barely glanced up when I entered, just kept reading a tattered paperback behind the counter. I grabbed a coffee from the pot that looked like it had been sitting there since noon and brought it to the register. I remember trying to sound casual when I asked, "Highway's pretty empty tonight, huh?" He grunted, not looking up. "Usually is this time of night." I think I saw someone out there, standing on the side of the road. Tall guy, just watching. My voice cracked a little. That's when he finally looked at me, and the expression on his face made my blood run cold. He didn't seem surprised. He didn't ask for clarification. He just nodded slightly, like I'd confirmed something he already knew. "Highway's full of strange folks," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Best you keep to yourself." I wanted to ask more, but something in his eyes warned me not to. He rang up my coffee, and I noticed his hands were shaking too, not from fear, but age. Or at least, that's what I told myself. As I was leaving, he called out, 15 more miles to the exit. Don't stop for nothing." I nodded, but didn't respond. Something about the way he said it, like he knew exactly where I was headed and what might happen before I got there, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Back in my car, I checked all my mirrors obsessively before pulling out. The coffee was bitter and lukewarm, but the caffeine helped clear my head a little. I decided to call someone, anyone, just to hear another human voice, but my phone still showed no service. I turned on the radio instead, but all I got was static on every station. The final stretch of Highway 57 felt endless. Every shadow made me flinch. Every bend in the road filled me with dread about what might be waiting around the corner. I kept thinking about what the gas station attendant had said. "Don't stop for nothing," like he knew something was out there. I was about 5 miles from the exit when I saw him again. This time he was standing directly in the middle of my lane, facing my car head-on. His feet were planted firmly, like he was challenging me to hit him. I slammed on the brakes instinctively, skidding to a stop about 20 feet away from him. For the first time, I could see his face clearly in my headlights. And it wasn't right. His eyes were completely black, not just dark, but like empty voids that seemed to absorb the light around them. His mouth was stretched into this unnaturally wide smile that extended far beyond where a human smile should end. It wasn't a happy smile. It was predatory, hungry. I sat there frozen, hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. He didn't move, didn't blink, just kept staring at me with that terrible smile. After what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, I slammed the car into reverse, tires screeching as I backed up frantically, eyes fixed on him the whole time. Then I shifted into drive, swerved around him using the opposite lane and floored it. As I passed, I couldn't help but look at him again. He turned his head to follow my movement, his body remaining completely still, neck twisting at an impossible angle. Our eyes met for a split second, and I felt something reach into me. Not physically, but like he was touching something inside my mind. I don't remember much of the rest of the drive. I was hyperventilating, crying, praying to a God I'm not sure I believe in. When I finally saw the exit sign, I nearly sobbed with relief. I didn't slow down until I reached my apartment complex, and even then, I kept checking my mirrors, terrified he'd somehow followed me home. I've been awake all night, lights on, doors locked, jumping at every sound. I can't shake the feeling that whatever I saw is still out there, waiting, that somehow by seeing him, I've marked myself in some way. I've lived in this area my whole life and never heard stories about Highway 57 being haunted or dangerous beyond the usual warnings about wildlife and poor lighting. But there must be others who've seen him. The gas station attendant knew something. The way he didn't seem surprised, the way he warned me not to stop. I'm never driving that highway again, especially not at night. And if you live around here, I'm begging you to avoid it too. I don't know what that thing was, a ghost, a demon, some kind of hallucination brought on by exhaustion, but it wasn't human. And something tells me it's still out there, standing in the darkness, waiting for the next person to drive by. Story 5. I've been driving trucks for 17 years now. I know every stretch of highway worth knowing between the east and west coasts. I've driven through blizzards, hailstorms, and tornado warnings. I've seen things on the road most people wouldn't believe. But what happened to me 3 weeks ago on I-90, I still can't make sense of it. Sometimes I wonder if I dreamed the whole thing, but then I feel that same cold sweat run down my back, and I know it was real. I was hauling a load of high-end furniture from Boston to Seattle. Good money, but a brutal timeline. My dispatcher was breathing down my neck about delivery dates, so I was pushing harder than I should have been. I'd been on the road for nearly 14 hours that day, stopping only for fuel and to use the bathroom. I know what you're thinking. That's over the legal limit. You're right. But when you're paid by the mile and have bills piling up at home, sometimes you make bad decisions. It was around 1 in the morning when things started getting weird. I was somewhere in South Dakota, I think. That part of I-90 is just endless darkness. No street lights, barely any other vehicles, just your headlights cutting through the black, the kind of emptiness that makes you feel like the last person on Earth. I had my radio playing softly, some late-night talk show about conspiracy theories. I normally don't buy into that stuff, but it helps keep me awake on long hauls. My eyelids were getting heavy, so I cranked the AC and rolled down my window. The cold air helped a little, but I knew I needed to find a truck stop soon before I became a statistic. That's when I noticed something off about my GPS. The little blue dot that represented my truck was frozen in place, like I wasn't moving at all, but I was definitely moving, 65 miles per hour according to my speedometer. I tapped the screen, thinking maybe it had frozen up. Nothing changed. I unplugged it and plugged it back in. Still nothing. The clock on the GPS was stuck at 1:11 a.m. I reached for my phone to check if I had service, but before I could grab it, my CB radio crackled to life. This startled me because I hadn't heard chatter for at least an hour. The static was loud at first, then it cleared up enough for me to hear a voice. "Mile marker 152, don't stop." The voice was breaking up badly. I picked up the handset. "Come again? You're breaking up." More static then. "Whatever you do, don't stop." The voice sounded urgent, almost panicked. "Who am I talking to? What's your 20?" I asked, using trucker lingo for location. The response sent chills down my spine. "They're looking for drivers. Don't stop. Keep moving." Then nothing but static. I tried to respond, but the CB went dead. Complete silence. Not even background static. I checked the power. It was still on, but nothing was coming through. Great. GPS frozen, CB radio dead. Just what I needed in the middle of nowhere at 1 in the morning. That's when I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I was relieved. Another truck meant I wasn't completely alone out here. But as I watched, the headlights grew larger, approaching fast. Too fast. This guy was doing at least 90, which is ridiculous for a semi. Within minutes, the truck was right on my tail, high beams blinding me. I tapped my brakes, hoping the driver would back off or pass me. Instead, the truck swerved into the left lane and pulled alongside me. It was an older model Peterbilt, dark blue or maybe black, hard to tell in the darkness. What caught my eye was the logo on the door, a stylized hawk or eagle with the words Midnight Express underneath. I'd never heard of that company before. I glanced over, expecting to see another tired driver. What I saw, or rather what I didn't see, made my blood run cold. There was no one behind the wheel. The cab was empty. I blinked hard, convinced I was hallucinating from exhaustion. I looked again. Still empty. But the truck was maintaining its speed perfectly, keeping pace with me like it was on cruise control. I pressed my accelerator, pushing my rig to 70. The Phantom truck matched my speed exactly. I slowed down to 55. It slowed down too, staying right beside me. We were the only two vehicles on that stretch of highway, moving in perfect, impossible synchronization. Then, without warning, the driverless truck suddenly veered off the highway. I watched in my side mirror as it drove straight into the darkness beyond the shoulder. No brake lights, no turn signal, just straight off the road. I expected to hear a crash, to see flames or something, but there was nothing. The truck simply vanished into the night as if it had never been there at all. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep hold of the wheel. I needed to stop, to collect myself, to make sense of what I'd just seen. Despite the warning on the CB, I knew I couldn't keep driving in this state. About 15 minutes later, I spotted a sign for a truck stop. Last chance rest stop, 2 miles. I took the exit and pulled into what had to be the most depressing truck stop I'd ever seen. The building was a single-story cinder block structure with flickering fluorescent signs advertising hot coffee and showers. The parking lot was surprisingly full of trucks, but something seemed off about them. They were all parked too neatly, too perfectly spaced. I pulled into an empty spot and shut down my engine. The sudden silence was deafening. I sat there for a moment, trying to calm my nerves, telling myself I'd just been seeing things. Lack of sleep, stress, maybe that gas station burrito from earlier. There had to be a logical explanation. The inside of the truck stop was just as depressing as the outside. Cracked linoleum floors, buzzing lights, and the smell of burnt coffee. There was a small diner section with a counter and a few booths. Behind the counter stood a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and hair pulled back in a tight bun. She was the only employee I could see. "Coffee black," I said as I slid onto a stool at the counter. She poured me a cup without a word, her eyes darting nervously to the clock on the wall. It read 1:11, the same time my GPS had frozen. "Been busy tonight?" I asked, trying to make conversation. She leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't be here." "Excuse me? This isn't a good place to stop, not at this hour." She glanced toward the back of the diner, and I followed her gaze. In the farthest booth, partially hidden in shadow, sat a solitary figure. A man, I thought, though I couldn't make out his features. He was wearing a trucker's cap and a dark jacket. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I could see a logo on the jacket sleeve, the same stylized bird I'd seen on the Phantom truck. My coffee cup nearly slipped from my hand. "Who is that?" I whispered. The waitress shook her head slightly. "You need to leave, now, while you still can." "What do you mean? What's going on here?" She refused to say more, just kept glancing at the clock. 1:11. The time hadn't changed. I left a $5 bill on the counter and stood up. As I did, I felt eyes on me, not just from the figure in the booth, but from somewhere else too. I turned and noticed for the first time that there were other people scattered throughout the diner. Silent, motionless customers seated at tables and booths. None of them were eating or drinking. They were just sitting there, watching me. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run. I backed toward the door, never taking my eyes off the figure in the shadowy booth. Just as I reached the exit, the figure stood up. I couldn't make out a face, just darkness where features should have been. But I could see the jacket clearly now. Midnight Express was embroidered across the back. I practically sprinted back to my truck. As I fumbled with my keys, I took a moment to look around the parking lot. In the harsh glow of the security lights, I could see what had bothered me earlier. All the trucks, every single one, had the same Midnight Express logo on their doors, and they didn't just look parked, they looked abandoned. Dust covered their windshields. Some had flat tires. They appeared to have been sitting there for years, not hours. My hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get my key in the ignition. As my engine roared to life, I glanced at my side mirror and nearly screamed. The figure from the diner was standing just behind my trailer, staring up at my cab. At least I think it was staring. I still couldn't make out any facial features, just that empty darkness beneath the cap. I threw my truck into gear and peeled out of that parking lot faster than an 18-wheeler should move. I didn't stop driving until the sun came up and I reached a busy truck stop in Wyoming, filled with normal trucks and normal living people. My GPS started working again around 3 a.m. and my CB radio came back online too. The rest of my haul to Seattle was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every time I checked my mirrors, I expected to see that dark Peterbilt gaining on me. It's been 3 weeks now. I've made 2 more cross-country runs since then, but I've taken different routes. I'll go hundreds of miles out of my way to avoid I-90, especially at night. My dispatcher thinks I'm crazy, but I don't care. The thing that keeps me up at night isn't just what I saw, it's what I felt in that truck stop. The stillness, the wrongness of it all. Those trucks weren't just parked there, they were waiting. And those people weren't just sitting in that diner, they were trapped. Sometimes when I'm driving at night, I'll catch a glimpse of a dark truck in my mirrors, or I'll see the Midnight Express logo on a jacket at a rest stop. Then I blink, and it's gone. But I know what I saw that night was real. I think about that CB warning a lot. They're looking for drivers. I think about all those empty trucks, perfectly parked, covered in years of dust and grime. And I think about how close I came to becoming one of them. Another truck in that lot, another silent figure in that diner, stuck forever at 1:11 a.m. So if you're hauling freight on I-90 and your GPS freezes up around 1 in the morning, or if you hear a broken voice on your CB warning you not to stop, for God's sake, listen. Keep driving, no matter how tired you are. Because whatever's waiting for you at that last chance rest stop isn't rest, it's something else entirely. And I don't think anyone who joins that fleet ever delivers their load. Story 6. I never thought I'd be the one posting something like this. I've spent the last few hours trying to make sense of what happened, but I can't. My hands are still trembling and I keep looking out the window even though it's daylight now. Last night was the worst night of my life. My husband Tom had to work late, again, at his accounting firm because of some end-of-quarter emergency. It's just been one of those weeks where everything piles up. I was alone in our house with my dog Max, a golden retriever we've had for 6 years. He's usually the most laid-back dog you'd ever meet. For context, we live in a fairly quiet New England suburb. Our house is one of those older colonials, the kind real estate agents call charming, when they really mean full of quirks and probably needs a new everything. It's a bit too big for just the 2 of us, to be honest. Tom inherited it from his grandparents 3 years ago. During the day, I love all the character and the way the sunlight streams through the tall windows. But at night, the hallways seem to stretch longer than they should. The corners stay dark no matter how many lamps you turn on. The old wooden floors creak with every temperature change. It was around 9:30 when things started to feel off. I was curled up on the couch in our living room, reading a mystery novel with Max snoozing at my feet. The wind had picked up outside, nothing unusual for October in New England. We were expecting a storm later that night. Max's head suddenly shot up. His ears perked forward and he let out this low growl that I've rarely heard from him. I looked up from my book and watched as he moved to the window, his hackles rising. "What is it, buddy? Just the wind," I remember saying, trying to sound casual, even though something about his behavior immediately put me on edge. I tried to go back to my book, but Max wouldn't settle. The growl turned into a more urgent bark, not his usual "someone's at the door" bark, but something deeper, more primal. He was staring intently at the large bay window that overlooks our backyard. That's when I first saw it. At the edge of our yard, where our property meets the wooded area behind our house, was a figure. It was so dark outside that at first I thought it might be a trick of the shadows, maybe a tree branch swaying in the wind. But as my eyes adjusted, I could see it was standing. Just standing there, completely still, looking toward our house. I remember thinking it must be a person, maybe a neighbor or someone who got lost. But even from that distance, something looked wrong. The proportions weren't right. The figure seemed unnaturally tall and thin. I got up and turned off the living room light so I could see better outside. Max went absolutely ballistic, barking and jumping at the window. I had to grab his collar to pull him back. When I looked again, the figure was closer. It had moved at least 20 feet toward the house, but I hadn't seen it walk. It was just in a different position. And now that it was closer, I could see what had bothered me about its proportions. Its limbs were too long, hanging down almost to where its knees should be. It stood perfectly straight, completely motionless. My heart started racing. I fumbled for my phone to call Tom, but when I looked at the screen, there was no signal. This happens sometimes during storms. Our service is spotty at best, but the timing couldn't have been worse. I looked back outside, and the figure was even closer now, maybe 30 feet from our house, still completely motionless, still staring. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was someone playing a prank. Halloween is coming up after all. Maybe some neighborhood kids with a costume or something on stilts. But deep down, I knew this wasn't a prank. There was something fundamentally wrong about the way it moved, or didn't move, like it was only pretending to be human. Max was going absolutely crazy by this point, snarling and barking in a way I'd never heard before. I decided to try the landline in the kitchen to call Tom. I didn't want to turn my back on the window, but I needed help. As I reached the kitchen doorway, I heard it, a light tapping on the window. 3 distinct taps, then silence. I froze. Max went quiet too, which somehow was worse than the barking. Tap, tap, tap. I slowly turned around. It was at the window now, right up against the glass. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, its head slightly tilted as though studying me. Where a face should have been was just darkness, a void. I couldn't make out any features at all. Its fingers, too long, too thin, were pressed against the glass, leaving what looked like greasy smudges with each tap. Tap, tap, tap. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. It was like my entire body had forgotten how to function. Max was backing away, whimpering, his tail between his legs. The tapping stopped. The figure tilted its head to the other side, as if confused by my reaction. Then, in one fluid movement that didn't look right, like watching something move underwater, it lowered its hand from the window and stepped back. And then it was gone. I stood there, frozen for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two. Max was still whimpering, now hiding under the coffee table. The sudden silence was almost as terrifying as the tapping had been. That's when I remembered. I hadn't locked the back door. Earlier that evening, I'd taken out the trash and must have forgotten to lock it afterward. It's something Tom always reminds me about. We're not in the city anymore, but still, better safe than sorry. As this realization hit me, I heard the unmistakable sound of our back door opening, the slight squeak of the hinges, the soft thud as it hit the wall. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps moving through our kitchen. They didn't sound right, the rhythm was off, like whoever was walking had an unusual gait. The lights in the living room flickered once, twice, then stabilized. Max had gone completely silent, pressing himself as far under the coffee table as he could go. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything, but my body wouldn't respond. I was completely paralyzed with fear as the footsteps got closer, moving down our hallway toward the living room. And then it was there, standing in the doorway, inside my house. It had to bend to fit through the door frame. Its head nearly touched our ceiling, which is almost 9 feet high. Its limbs hung wrong, too long and jointed in places. They shouldn't be. And still, where its face should have been, there was nothing but darkness. The lights flickered again. In the brief moments of darkness, I could swear I saw something moving within the void of its face, something that shouldn't be there. It tilted its head again, studying me with that featureless face. Then it took a step forward into our living room. The movement was too smooth, like it was gliding rather than walking. And then it spoke. The voice didn't come from where its mouth should be. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a whisper that somehow filled the entire room. "You're not supposed to be here." The lights went out completely. I screamed, finally finding my voice, but it was swallowed by the darkness. I could feel it moving closer in the blackness, that impossible presence closing in on me. I don't remember what happened next. I must have passed out from fear. When I came to, I was still in the living room. The lights were back on. Max was licking my face, whimpering. There was no sign of the figure. The clock on the wall said it was just after midnight. Only about 15 minutes had passed since I first spotted the figure at the edge of our yard. Tom came home around 1 in the morning. He found me sitting in the living room, every light in the house turned on, clutching a kitchen knife with Max pressed against my side. I tried to explain what happened, but I could see he didn't fully believe me. He checked the house, found nothing out of place, no open doors, no evidence anyone had been inside, but the greasy smudges were still on the window. 3 distinct fingerprints, much larger than any human hand could make. Tom thinks it might have been a hallucination brought on by stress, or maybe someone trying to scare me. He's been worried about my anxiety lately. Maybe he's right. But Max won't go near that window anymore. And this morning, when I was cleaning the glass to remove those fingerprints, I noticed something carved into the wooden frame. It's small, barely noticeable unless you're looking for it. 5 words. "This is not your home." The carving looks old, like it's been there for years, but I swear it wasn't there before last night. I don't know what to do. Tom doesn't want to move. This house has been in his family for generations, but I can't shake the feeling that whatever that thing was, it's not gone, it's just waiting, and I can't stop thinking about what it said. "You're not supposed to be here," like I was the intruder. Story 7. I still can't sleep properly, and it's been 2 weeks since that night. Every creak in this house makes me jump, and I refuse to go into the basement alone anymore. My parents think I'm being dramatic, but they weren't here. They didn't see what Josh and I saw. It started on a Friday night in October. My parents had left that morning for my aunt's wedding in Denver. They'd be gone the whole weekend. Josh, my older brother, was supposed to be at his friend Mike's house for a gaming marathon, so I had the house to myself for the first time ever. I'm 17, so my parents finally trusted me to stay alone, and honestly, I was excited about it. It was pouring rain that night, the kind where it sounds like someone's throwing pebbles at your windows. I'd ordered pizza, sprawled out on the living room couch with all the junk food I wanted, and decided to watch some horror movie on Netflix. Looking back, that was probably my first mistake. Around 10:30, I was halfway through the movie when the storm really picked up. The wind was howling, tree branches scraping against the side of the house. Our home is in this quiet suburb called Pineville, one of those neighborhoods where nothing ever happens, which is why what happened next was so terrifying. I was at the part of the movie where the main character was investigating a noise in their attic when our power went out, just like that. Complete darkness, except for the glow of my phone. I nearly jumped out of my skin. The timing couldn't have been worse. At first, I just sat there, waiting for the power to come back on. After about 5 minutes of darkness, I realized I needed to check the circuit breaker. I used my phone as a flashlight and made my way toward the kitchen to grab the real flashlight we keep in the drawer. As I passed by the sliding glass door that leads to our backyard, something caught my eye. A movement. I froze and turned my phone's light toward the glass. For a split second, and I swear this on my life, I saw someone standing there, just watching me. A dark silhouette against the rain. When I blinked, it was gone. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the horror movie had me seeing things. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. Still, I needed that flashlight, and the circuit breaker was in the basement. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer with shaking hands. It was one of those heavy-duty ones my dad keeps for emergencies. I clicked it on, relieved when it cast a strong beam across the kitchen. The basement door is off the kitchen, and I hesitated before opening it. Our basement isn't finished, just concrete floors, exposed pipes, and shelves of storage boxes. During the day, it's just a basement, but at night, with no power, I took a deep breath and opened the door. The darkness below seemed to swallow the flashlight beam. I called out stupidly, "Hello," like they do in horror movies. No answer, of course. I started down the stairs, one hand on the railing, the other holding the flashlight. The beam bounced with each step, creating shifting shadows that made my heart race. About halfway down, the flashlight started flickering. "No, no, no," I whispered, tapping it against my palm. It stabilized for a moment, then began to dim. I hurried down the rest of the stairs, desperate to reach the circuit breaker before being plunged into total darkness. The basement felt colder than usual, damp almost. I could hear water dripping somewhere, probably from the storm finding its way through some crack. The circuit breaker is on the far wall, past all the storage shelves and my dad's workbench. As I moved across the basement floor, the flashlight flickered again, more violently this time. In that stuttering light, I saw something move in the corner of the room. Not like the house settling or a shadow playing tricks, an actual movement, like someone shifting their weight. I froze. The flashlight gave one final surge of brightness, illuminating the far corner where we keep old holiday decorations. There was something there, someone there, crouched behind the boxes. Before I could scream, the flashlight died completely. In that instant of total darkness, I felt something cold wrap around my wrist. Not like a hand, more like fingers that were too long, too strong. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, right next to my ear, so close I could feel cold breath on my neck. "I've been waiting for you." The voice wasn't human. It was raspy, like someone who'd spent years breathing in dust. I screamed then, yanking my arm away with every ounce of strength I had. Whatever had me let go, and I bolted for the stairs, tripping over boxes and tools in the darkness. I scrambled up the stairs on all fours, slamming the basement door behind me and leaning against it, gasping for breath. My phone was still in my pocket, and I pulled it out with trembling hands, turning on the flashlight again. The kitchen was empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. I needed to get out of the house. I ran to the front door, grabbing my keys from the hook. Just as I was about to unlock the deadbolt, someone pounded on the door from the outside. I screamed again, backing away. The pounding continued, and then I heard my brother's voice. "Kate, let me in. It's pouring out here." I'd never been so relieved to hear Josh's voice. I flung the door open, and there he stood, soaking wet in his hoodie and jeans. "What are you doing here?" I gasped, pulling him inside. "I thought you were at Mike's." Josh shook the rain from his hair. "I was, but I decided to come home early. Mike's little brother was being annoying and—" He stopped, looking at my face. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Between sobs, I told him about the power outage, the figure at the sliding door, and what happened in the basement. I expected him to laugh, to tell me I was being ridiculous. Instead, his face went pale. "Kate," he said slowly, I heard someone moving around when I was coming up the driveway. I thought it was you, but it didn't sound like you." We stared at each other. The house creaked around us in the storm. "We need to leave," I said. "Now." Josh nodded. "Let's go to the Hendersons next door." We ran out into the rain without even grabbing jackets. The downpour was so heavy it was hard to see, but we sprinted across our front lawn toward the neighbor's house. About halfway there, I glanced back at our house. Standing in the open doorway was a tall figure. It was too dark to make out details, but I could tell it wasn't human. The proportions were wrong, the limbs too long. As we watched, it stepped back inside our house and closed the door. The Hendersons called the police for us. Mr. Henderson gave us towels and hot chocolate while we waited, but I couldn't stop shaking. Josh kept looking out their window at our house, his face grim. The police arrived quickly. 2 officers who listened to our story with professional concern but obvious skepticism. They went to check out our house, and we watched anxiously from the Hendersons' living room window. After about 20 minutes, one of the officers returned to tell us they'd found nothing. The power was indeed out. A tree had fallen on a line down the street, but there was no sign of an intruder. No footprints in the mud outside, no forced entry, nothing disturbed in the basement. "Are you sure you didn't just scare yourselves?" the officer asked kindly. "It's a spooky night, and horror movies can play tricks on your mind." Josh opened his mouth to argue, but then froze, his eyes fixed on something behind the officer. I followed his gaze to our house across the street. There was a light in my upstairs bedroom window. Not electric light, but the flickering glow of what looked like a candle or lantern, and silhouetted against my curtains was a figure watching us. "There!" I grabbed the officer's arm. "In my bedroom!" The officers rushed back to our house. We watched as they entered, flashlights sweeping through the downstairs windows. Minutes later, the lights appeared upstairs, moving from room to room. Finally, they came back out and returned to the Hendersons. "Nothing," the officer said, shaking his head. "We checked every room, closet, under the beds. There's no one there, kids." They offered to do another sweep, but couldn't stay all night. Eventually, they left, promising to drive by periodically. The Hendersons offered to let us stay, but Josh, trying to be brave, said we'd be fine. The power company had reported they'd have electricity restored by morning. We went back home around 2 in the morning. Neither of us wanted to split up, so we camped out in the living room with candles and baseball bats Josh got from the garage. Somehow, we both fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. When morning came, the power was back on, and the house seemed normal in the daylight. But I couldn't shake what had happened. While Josh was in the shower, I worked up the courage to go back to the basement. In the daylight filtering through the small basement windows, it didn't seem as terrifying. I went straight to the corner where I'd seen the movement, where I'd felt that cold grip on my wrist. Moving some boxes aside, I noticed something I'd never seen before, a small wooden door built into the foundation wall. It was about 3 feet high, made of old, dark wood that didn't match anything else in our 1990s house. The door was slightly ajar, and when I pulled it open, I discovered a narrow earthen tunnel leading away into darkness. I slammed the door shut and ran upstairs. Josh didn't believe me until I showed him. We stared at that little door, neither of us brave enough to see where the tunnel led. We told our parents when they got home Sunday night, but by then the door was gone, just solid concrete wall where I swear the wooden door had been. They thought we were playing an elaborate prank or had let our imaginations run wild during the storm. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt in the darkness. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear scratching from inside the walls, like something trying to find its way back in. Whatever was in our basement that night is still out there. Or maybe it never left at all. I'm writing this from my bedroom, where I've pushed my dresser against the wall that faces the basement. Josh says I'm being paranoid, but I've noticed he doesn't go down there alone anymore either. I don't know what was waiting for me in our basement that night, but I know it's been waiting a very long time, and I'm terrified it's still waiting now. Story 8. I've been sitting on this experience for almost a month now, trying to make sense of what happened. I still can't sleep properly. Every time I close my eyes, I see her face. I need to get this out, even if no one believes me. It was my stupid idea to go to Hollow Creek Manor in the first place. I've always been obsessed with local history, especially the dark stuff that no one likes to talk about. When our professor assigned an open research project on forgotten local histories, I immediately thought of the Harrington family disappearance. Everyone in Elmswood knows about Hollow Creek Manor. It's this massive Victorian mansion tucked away in the Blue Ridge Mountains about 20 minutes outside town. The place has been abandoned since 1973, when the entire Harrington family just vanished overnight. Like all 6 of them, gone without a trace. No bodies, no evidence of foul play, nothing. Just an empty house with dinner still on the table. I convinced my girlfriend Emily to come along since she's into photography and thought it would make for some killer portfolio shots. Then David, my roommate, decided to join because he's always been the skeptical type who thinks ghost stories are mass hysteria perpetuated by suggestible minds. His words, not mine. Sarah was the last addition to our group. She's in David's psychology seminar and thought the place would make an interesting case study on local superstitions. None of us really believed the stories. Well, maybe I did a little. The locals talk about hearing screams from the property on stormy nights, seeing lights when there's no electricity, that kind of thing. But when you grow up in a small town, you get used to people making up stories to keep life interesting. We picked last Tuesday because the weather forecast was clear and we all had the day off from classes. It was one of those sticky summer days when the air feels like a wet blanket. We parked at the bottom of the hill since the driveway was completely overgrown. I remember checking the time as we got out of the car. It was around 2 in the afternoon. The gate was this rusty wrought iron thing with the Harrington family crest worked into the metal. It took David and me both pushing to get it open enough for us to squeeze through. The sound it made, this high-pitched screech, made the hair on my arms stand up. Emily said it was like the house was already screaming at us to leave. The walk up to the mansion was creepy enough. The path was barely visible under all the weeds and fallen branches. There were these old stone statues lining what used to be the driveway, angels and cherubs with their faces worn away by time and weather. Emily kept stopping to take pictures, saying something about perfect decay aesthetics for her photography class. When we finally reached the house, I felt this weird pressure in my chest. The place was massive. 3 stories of dark stone and rotting wood, with these tall, narrow windows that looked like they were watching us. Most of the glass was intact, which seemed strange for a house that had been abandoned for almost 50 years. "I don't like this," Sarah said right away. She had her arms wrapped around herself despite the heat. "It feels wrong." David laughed and called her suggestible, which pissed her off. "I'm serious," she said. "Don't you feel like something's watching us?" I did, but I didn't want to admit it. "It's just an old house, guys. The Harringtons probably just moved away without telling anyone because they were in debt or something." The front door was partially open, hanging off one hinge. As we stepped inside, the temperature dropped noticeably. The entryway was this huge space with a grand staircase leading up to the second floor. There was a chandelier dangling precariously overhead, covered in cobwebs but otherwise intact. "This place is a time capsule," Emily whispered, her camera clicking rapidly. She wasn't wrong. Apart from the dust and cobwebs, everything looked like the owners had just stepped out for a minute. The dining room was the first room we explored, and honestly, it freaked me out more than anything else. The table was set for dinner. Plates, silverware, glasses, even cloth napkins. There was food there too, or what used to be food. Now it was just black, mummified remains. 6 plates, 6 chairs, 6 empty water glasses. "Did they really just disappear in the middle of dinner?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking slightly. David was examining the table with his typical skeptical expression. "Someone probably staged this after they left, you know, to feed the legend. But something about the way everything was positioned felt genuine. One chair was pushed back further than the others, like someone had gotten up suddenly. A napkin was on the floor next to it. We moved on to the library next, which was my idea. If there were any clues about what happened to the Harringtons, I figured they'd be there. The room was incredible. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. There was a huge desk in the center, with papers still scattered across it. The ink had faded to almost nothing, but you could see the handwriting. Emily was taking pictures of everything while David poked around at the books. Sarah kept hanging back near the doorway like she was afraid to come fully into the room. "You okay?" I asked her. She shook her head. "I swear someone's watching us, Jake. I can feel it." I was about to tell her she was being paranoid when I noticed something weird. There were footprints in the dust on the floor, not ours, different ones. They seemed to start in the middle of the room and lead nowhere. That's when we heard the first sound, a soft thump from somewhere upstairs. "What was that?" Emily lowered her camera. "Old houses make noises," David said, but he wasn't looking so confident anymore. "Let's check upstairs," I suggested, trying to sound braver than I felt. The staircase creaked under our weight as we climbed to the second floor. The hallway was long and dark, with doors on either side. Most of them were closed. The wallpaper was peeling off in strips, revealing the plaster underneath. "Master bedroom should be at the end," I said, remembering the floor plans I'd found in the library archives back at school. We made our way down the hall, the floorboards groaning with every step. The air felt heavier up here, thicker somehow. It was getting harder to breathe. The master bedroom door was ajar. I pushed it open slowly, wincing at the creak of the hinges. The room was huge, with a four-poster bed dominating the center. The bedding was still in place, though yellowed with age. There was a vanity against one wall, bottles of perfume and makeup arranged neatly on top. A hairbrush with strands of gray hair still caught in the bristles. Sarah gasped. "Look." She pointed to the vanity chair. There was a book sitting on it, a leather-bound journal with the initials MH embossed in gold on the cover. "Margaret Harrington's diary," I whispered, feeling a chill run down my spine despite the summer heat. Sarah picked it up and carefully opened it. The pages were brittle but intact. "It's dated 1973, she said. "The last entry is from June 28th, the night they disappeared." We gathered around as Sarah began to read aloud. Margaret's handwriting was elegant, but increasingly frantic as the entries progressed. She wrote about hearing voices in the walls, seeing shadows moving on their own, about how her youngest son had started talking to someone called the Lady in the Walls, and how her husband Thomas was becoming more distant and strange each day. The final entry made my blood run cold. "They're not shadows anymore. They have faces now. Thomas says we should leave, but I don't think they'll let us. The children are afraid to sleep. I hear scratching in the walls all night. Something is in this house with us, something that has always been here. I don't think we ever truly owned this place. I think it owns us." The temperature in the room plummeted as Sarah finished reading. I could see my breath fogging in front of my face. The windows started to rattle in their frames, softly at first, then with increasing violence. "What the hell?" David backed away from the windows. "Is there a storm coming?" But the sky outside was still clear and blue. That's when we heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The bedroom door slammed shut with a bang that made us all jump. Emily screamed and grabbed my arm. I ran to the door and tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like it was welded shut. "This isn't funny," David shouted, his face pale. "Who's doing this?" But we all knew there was no one else in the house, or at least no one living. The air in the room changed. It felt oppressive, malevolent, like something was pressing down on us from all sides. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen and shift. "Jake," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "Look at the mirror." I turned toward the vanity mirror and felt my heart stop. There was a reflection in it that wasn't ours. A woman, gaunt and pale, with sunken eyes and long, stringy gray hair. She was wearing what must have once been an elegant nightgown, now tattered and stained. As we watched in horror, she turned her head slowly to look directly at us. Her mouth stretched into a grotesque smile that was too wide for her face, revealing blackened teeth. "Margaret Harrington," Sarah breathed, the diary falling from her hands. The figure in the mirror began to move, but not like a normal reflection. She seemed to be getting closer, as if she was walking toward us through the mirror itself. I couldn't move. None of us could. It was like we were frozen in place. Then she stepped out of the mirror. I can't adequately describe the sound that came out of her mouth. It wasn't human. It was like dozens of voices screaming in agony all at once. The walls started to vibrate. The floor beneath our feet felt like it was breathing. "Please," Emily sobbed. "Please let us go." Margaret's head tilted at an impossible angle. The smile never left her face. She raised one skeletal hand and pointed at us, one by one. "You're ours now," she said, her voice a raspy whisper that somehow filled the entire room. "Just like the others. Just like my family." The shadows in the corners of the room began to move toward us, taking shape as they came. I could make out faces in them, children, a man, other figures I couldn't identify. They surrounded us, their touches like ice on my skin. The room seemed to be closing in. The walls were literally moving, the ceiling lowering. Margaret's laughter echoed off every surface as the darkness started to swallow us. I don't remember screaming, but Emily later told me we all were. The darkness was absolute. I couldn't see the others anymore, but I could hear them. Then even that faded and there was nothing but cold and silence. I don't know how long we were wherever we were. It felt like hours. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I just existed in that void, aware but paralyzed. Then, suddenly, light. We were outside, standing by the front gate of Hollow Creek Manor. The sun was setting. According to my phone, it was 8:30 in the evening, over 6 hours since we'd entered the house. None of us had any memory of leaving the bedroom or walking back down through the house. Emily's camera was gone. Sarah no longer had the diary. David's phone, which he'd been using to record EVPs, had been wiped clean. We went to the police, but they just looked at us like we were crazy college kids pulling a prank. Without any evidence, they said there was nothing they could do. They said kids have been breaking into that old house for decades, and no one's ever disappeared. But I know what we saw. I know what we felt. And I know we got lucky. Whatever is in that house let us go, and I don't know why. I've been researching the Harringtons obsessively since then. I found an old newspaper article that mentions a family of tourists who went missing in 1985 after reportedly going to explore the haunted mansion outside town. In 2002, a local teenager vanished after telling friends he was going to spend the night in Hollow Creek Manor on a dare. The house is still there, still waiting. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, feeling like Margaret is standing over my bed, that same terrible smile on her face. I hear her voice in my dreams. "You're ours now." I don't think we truly escaped. I think we were just released. For now. Story 9. I never thought I'd be sharing this. I've tried to forget it for years, but some things just stick with you, no matter how hard you try to shake them off. It's been almost 7 years since we moved out of that farmhouse, and I still check every mirror I encounter. I still flinch when I catch my own reflection in store windows. I still sleep with the bathroom mirror covered. I was 15 when we moved to that place. My dad got a new job in rural Vermont, and my mom fell in love with this charming old farmhouse that was way out in the middle of nowhere. It was built in the 1800s, had these creaky wooden floors, weird little nooks and crannies, and that distinct smell old houses have, like wood polish and something else you can't quite place. My 10-year-old brother Tommy was thrilled about the move. He kept going on about having space to build forts and catch frogs. I was less enthusiastic. Moving in the middle of sophomore year meant leaving all my friends behind and starting over at a new school where everyone already had their established groups. The day we moved in was exhausting. The movers kept complaining about the narrow staircase, and my dad nearly threw his back out trying to get the couch through the front door. I remember being annoyed at how cheerful my mom was through it all, like we were living in some idyllic country dream instead of a drafty old house with questionable plumbing. While everyone was busy arranging furniture downstairs, I decided to explore the upper floor. There were 3 bedrooms and a bathroom on the second floor, but what caught my interest was the narrow staircase leading up to the attic. I'd never had an attic before, and something about having a space completely separate from the rest of the house appealed to my teenage desire for privacy. The attic stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed up. The space was bigger than I expected, with dormer windows on either end, letting in streams of dusty light. The ceiling sloped down on both sides, but there was enough headroom in the center that even my dad could stand up straight. It was mostly empty except for some old boxes the previous owners had left behind. But what stood out immediately was the mirror. It was propped against the far wall, an ornate full-length antique that looked completely out of place. The frame was dark wood, carved with these intricate symbols that I initially thought were just decorative. They looked like a mix of letters and pictographs, curving around the entire frame in no pattern I could recognize. The glass itself was slightly cloudy with age, giving it this hazy quality that softened reflections. I remember thinking it was probably valuable and wondering why the previous owners would leave it behind. When I went back downstairs and told my parents about the attic and the mirror, my mum got excited. "Oh, that sounds beautiful. Maybe we could bring it down for the entryway." But something made me say, "Actually, I was thinking I could use the attic as my bedroom. It's bigger than the other rooms, and I could have my own space." My parents exchanged looks. Dad was concerned about heating the space in winter, but Mom thought it would be good for me to have some independence. Eventually they agreed, and we spent the rest of the day moving my bed, desk, and other furniture up there. I positioned my bed under one of the dormers and put my desk under the other. The mirror ended up on the wall opposite my bed. I remember looking at myself in it as I arranged my things, noticing how the symbols on the frame seemed to shift in the changing light. That first night, I had trouble sleeping. The house made all these unfamiliar noises, creaking and settling sounds that kept startling me awake. Around 3 in the morning, I opened my eyes and looked directly at the mirror. Something was off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. The room reflected in the mirror looked darker than it should have, even accounting for the night. And my reflection? I sat up to get a better look, and my reflection did too, but there was a delay. Just a fraction of a second, but enough that I noticed. I got out of bed and approached the mirror. My reflection approached too, matching my movements, but its eyes looked wrong. They seemed deeper, darker somehow. I leaned in close, my nose almost touching the glass, and that's when I saw it. My reflection's eyes were hollow, not empty sockets or anything that dramatic, but like there was nothing behind them. No light, no life. I stumbled backward, tripping over a box I hadn't unpacked yet. When I looked at the mirror again, everything seemed normal. I told myself I was just tired, that it was a trick of the light or my imagination working overtime in a new place. That night, I dreamed that I woke up to see my reflection standing beside my bed, even though I was still lying down. Dream me watched in horror as my reflection leaned over me, its face split into this terrible grin. Its hands reached for my throat, and they were ice cold. I jerked awake just as those fingers made contact, gasping for breath and sweating despite the cool attic air. I was too embarrassed to tell anyone about it the next day. I was 15, too old to be scared of mirrors and bad dreams. Instead, I covered the mirror with a sheet before going to school, telling myself I just didn't want to be distracted by it while studying. School was as awkward as expected. I sat alone at lunch, fielding the occasional curious glance or half-hearted introduction. By the time I got home, I was mentally and emotionally drained. All I wanted was to collapse on my bed and lose myself in a book or some music. When I climbed the stairs to the attic, I froze in the doorway. The sheet had been removed from the mirror. I distinctly remembered securing it that morning, tucking the corners behind the frame so it wouldn't slip. "Mom," I called down the stairs, "did you come up to my room today?" "No, honey," she called back from the kitchen. "Is something wrong?" "No, it's fine," I replied, though it definitely wasn't. I approached the mirror cautiously. My reflection approached too, but something about the movement was subtly wrong. It was matching me, but the timing was just slightly off, like there was a delay in transmission. I raised my right hand. My reflection raised its right hand a heartbeat later. I took a step to the side. My reflection followed after the smallest pause. I backed away, grabbed the sheet from where it had been neatly folded on my desk, who had folded it, and threw it over the mirror again. That night at dinner, I tried to bring it up casually. "So that mirror in the attic, do you know anything about it? Like who owned it before?" Dad shrugged, his mouth full of pot roast. Mom looked thoughtful. "The realtor mentioned that the house has only had 3 owners since it was built. The last family only stayed about a year before moving out suddenly. Something about a job transfer, I think." "Did they say anything specific about the attic or the mirror?" "No, why?" Mom looked concerned. "Is something wrong with it?" I hesitated. "It's just weird. It has all these symbols carved into it." "Probably just decorative," Dad said dismissively. "Those old pieces can be pretty ornate." Tommy piped up, "Can I see it? You never let me in your room." "No," I said too quickly. "I mean, it's nothing special, just old." After dinner, I went back up to my room and did my homework with my back to the covered mirror. I could feel it there, like a presence watching me. A couple of times, I thought I heard whispering, so faint I couldn't make out words, just the rhythm of speech. Each time, I turned around to find the room empty, the sheet still in place over the mirror. I went to bed early that night, exhausted from the stress of the new school and the mirror situation. I fell into a deep sleep almost immediately. I woke to a sound like fingernails tapping on glass. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. The attic was dark except for the dim glow of my alarm clock, 3:15 in the morning. The tapping continued, rhythmic and insistent. It was coming from the mirror. I lay frozen in bed, unable to move as the tapping grew louder. Then it stopped abruptly, replaced by the sound of something sliding against the glass, like a hand being dragged across its surface. I finally worked up the courage to reach for my bedside lamp. When the light clicked on, I saw that the sheet had fallen or been pulled from the mirror, and my reflection was standing perfectly still, staring at me with those hollow eyes. I was sitting up in bed, but my reflection was standing, its arms hanging limply at its sides. As I watched, it slowly raised one arm and pointed directly at me. I screamed. My parents came rushing up the attic stairs. By the time they burst into the room, the mirror showed only my terrified face, sitting up in bed. I was hysterical, trying to explain what I'd seen, but it came out as incoherent babbling. "Sarah, you were having a nightmare," my dad said firmly. "No, it was real. The mirror, there's something wrong with it." My mom sat on the edge of my bed, stroking my hair. "Honey, it's just an old mirror. Maybe the attic wasn't such a good idea after all. All these shadows and creaky noises." "I'm not making this up," I insisted. "My reflection moved on its own." My parents exchanged that look, the one that said they thought I was being dramatic. Dad covered the mirror again, and Mum stayed with me until I calmed down. They left my bedside lamp on when they went back downstairs. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next day was Saturday. I refused to be alone in the attic, so I spent most of the day helping Mum unpack the kitchen. Every once in a while, I'd hear noises from upstairs, like footsteps crossing the attic floor or the sound of my closet door opening and closing. Mum didn't hear them or pretended not to. By late afternoon, I was jittery with anxiety. The rational part of my brain tried to convince me I was overreacting, but I couldn't shake the image of my reflection standing and pointing while I sat in bed. Then Tommy came running into the kitchen, his face pale. "Sarah's room is doing weird stuff." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" I was playing upstairs and I heard someone call my name from Sarah's room, but when I went in, nobody was there. Mom frowned. "Tommy, were you in Sarah's room without permission?" He shook his head vigorously. "I just looked in, but then I saw the big mirror with the blanket on it moving." My mother sighed. "You two need to stop with the ghost stories. This is an old house. It makes noises. Things settle." "But Mom," Tommy started. "No buts. Sarah, why don't you take your brother outside to play? It's a beautiful day." I didn't want to go upstairs to get my jacket, so I borrowed one of Mom's from the coat rack by the door. Tommy and I spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the property, deliberately staying away from the house. As the sun started to set, we reluctantly headed back inside. Dad was working on fixing a leaky pipe under the kitchen sink, and Mom was starting dinner. The normality of the scene was almost enough to make me believe I'd imagined everything. Almost. "I'm going to grab my phone from upstairs," I told Tommy. "Stay down here, okay?" He nodded, already distracted by the TV Dad had managed to set up. I climbed the stairs slowly, my heart pounding harder with each step. The attic door was closed, even though I'd left it open that morning. I stood outside it for a long moment, gathering my courage. When I finally pushed the door open, I gasped. The sheet was off the mirror again, and my room was a mess. Books pulled from shelves, drawers opened, clothes scattered across the floor. It looked like someone had been searching for something. And there, reflected in the mirror, was my room, but intact, orderly, exactly as it should have been. The mirror wasn't reflecting reality anymore. I backed toward the door, unable to take my eyes off the mirror. In the reflection, my desk chair suddenly moved, turning to face the mirror as if someone invisible had sat down in it. I heard Tommy's voice behind me. "Sarah, what happened to your room?" I spun around. "Tommy, don't..." But he was already pushing past me, his eyes wide as he took in the chaos. "Whoa, did you do this?" "No! Tommy, we need to go downstairs right now." I grabbed for his arm, but he ducked away, moving further into the room. "The mirror," he said, pointing. "It looks different in there." I looked back at the mirror. The reflection now showed both of us standing in the attic, but the attic in the mirror was tidy, and our reflections were standing perfectly still, staring at us. "Tommy, don't look at it." I lunged for him, but I was too late. He had already stepped closer to the mirror, fascinated. "Look, Sarah, they're not copying us." In the mirror, Tommy's reflection suddenly smiled, a horrible, empty smile that Tommy himself wasn't making. Then, in one fluid motion, it pressed its hands against the glass from the other side. "Cool." Tommy reached out, placing his hands against the glass to match his reflections. The glass rippled like water. Before I could scream, Tommy's reflection grabbed his wrists and pulled. Tommy's arms sank into the mirror up to his elbows, his real face transforming from amazement to terror in an instant. "Sarah," he screamed, "help me! It's pulling me in." I grabbed him around the waist and pulled with all my strength. For a terrifying moment, we were caught in a tug of war, with Tommy's arms disappearing into what should have been solid glass. In desperation, I grabbed a heavy bookend from the floor and smashed it against the mirror. The glass cracked but didn't break. I hit it again, harder. More cracks appeared, spreading like a web across the surface. Inside the mirror, I could see more reflections now, distorted versions of myself and Tommy, all with those same hollow eyes, all reaching toward us through the fracturing glass. With one final blow, the mirror shattered. Tommy fell backward, his arms suddenly free, and we both collapsed onto the floor among shards of broken glass. Where the mirror had been, there was nothing but the wall behind it. No portal, no other dimension, just broken pieces of reflective glass and the carved wooden frame. Tommy was sobbing, examining his arms where his reflection had grabbed him. There were red marks, like handprints, circling both his wrists. I heard Mum and Dad running up the stairs, shouting our names. I couldn't even begin to explain what had happened. I just held Tommy as he cried, both of us staring at the empty frame and the glittering shards that surrounded us. We moved out the next day. My parents didn't ask questions after seeing Tommy's wrists and the state of the attic. Dad called the realtor that night, and by morning we were packing our essential items into the car. We left most of our furniture behind, too afraid to stay long enough for a proper move. I never went back to that house. I don't know if anyone else ever moved in. I don't want to know. It's been 7 years, and I still can't look in mirrors without checking first to make sure my reflection moves when I move. I still cover the bathroom mirror at night. Tommy won't talk about what happened. The few times I've tried to bring it up, he changes the subject or leaves the room. Sometimes I wake up at exactly 3:15 in the morning, feeling like someone is watching me, and sometimes, just sometimes, I catch a glimpse of something wrong in my reflection, a delay in movement, a strange stillness in the eyes, and I wonder if something followed us out of that house, trapped in every reflective surface, just waiting for another chance to pull us through. Story 10. I never believed in the supernatural until I moved to Austin last July. I found a charming little house in what seemed like the perfect suburb. Quiet streets lined with well-kept homes, neighbors who waved as they collected their mail, kids riding bikes. You know, that picture-perfect American neighborhood vibe. The real estate agent said I was getting a steal on the price, and I was just happy to find somewhere affordable in this market. The first week was pretty normal, unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, meeting a few neighbors who brought over cookies and casseroles. Everyone was friendly, except when I mentioned living next to the Harrisons. Their reactions were odd. They'd just nod, smile tightly, and change the subject. At the time, I didn't think much of it. The Harrison house stood out like a sore thumb on our otherwise pristine street. While every other yard was meticulously maintained with trimmed hedges and blooming flowers, theirs looked like something from a horror movie. The paint was peeling off in long strips, vines crawled up the walls like skeletal fingers, and the yard was so overgrown you could barely see the walkway. The windows were always covered with these heavy, dark drapes, even during the worst of the Texas heat wave we were experiencing. I tried to introduce myself a few times, but no one ever answered the door. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of movement behind those heavy curtains, just shadows shifting behind the fabric. Once or twice, I saw what I assumed was Mr. Harrison retrieving mail, a tall, gaunt man who never acknowledged my waves or greetings. It was about 3 weeks after moving in when I first heard the noises. I was up late unpacking the last of my books when I heard this rhythmic thumping coming from their house. At first I thought it might be some home repair work, but it was nearly midnight. Who does DIY projects at midnight? Then I heard what sounded like chanting, low, guttural sounds that made the hair on my neck stand up. It wasn't in any language I recognized. The sounds continued for about 20 minutes before abruptly stopping. The next morning I asked my neighbor across the street, Linda, about the Harrisons. "Oh, they keep to themselves," she said, deadpan. "Been here longer than anyone else on the block." "Do they often do work on their house at night?" I pressed. Linda's smile faltered. "I wouldn't worry about what they do. Best to just mind your own business with them." Then she quickly excused herself, claiming she had cookies in the oven. The following week, we had a neighborhood-wide power outage during a thunderstorm. I was sitting in my living room, using my phone as a flashlight and cursing myself for not buying emergency candles, when I noticed something strange. The Harrison house had lights on, not just flashlights or candles, actual electric lights flickering behind those heavy curtains. I grabbed my raincoat and stepped onto my porch, staring in confusion. How could they have power when the entire grid was down? No one had generators in our neighborhood. I'd have heard them. Curiosity got the better of me, and I crossed my lawn, approaching their house. As I got closer, I could hear that chanting again, louder this time. The rain muffled it somewhat, but there was no mistaking that same guttural sound. I crept up to one of their front windows, where there was a small gap in the curtains. What I saw still gives me nightmares. There were at least 6 or 7 people inside, arranged in a circle. They were wearing what looked like dark robes, and they were swaying in unison with the chanting. In the center of their circle was something I couldn't quite make out, something that seemed to be moving on its own. Before I could get a better look, a flash of lightning illuminated me standing at their window. One of the figures turned and looked directly at me. I ran home so fast I slipped twice in the mud. The next morning, I was shocked to see the Harrisons' yard had been completely transformed. The jungle of weeds was gone, replaced by a neatly trimmed lawn. The vines had been cut back, and the walkway was suddenly visible and clean. It would have taken days of work to make that kind of transformation, but it had happened overnight, during a storm no less. That's when things started getting really weird. I began noticing Mr. Harrison in his backyard almost every evening, digging. Just digging holes, filling them back in, then digging new ones. Sometimes he'd work for hours, his tall frame hunched over a shovel, moving with a tireless energy that seemed unnatural for a man his age. One evening, while taking out my trash, I caught him staring at me. He didn't wave or nod, just fixed me with this intense, unblinking stare until I went back inside. About a month after moving in, I was woken up around 3 in the morning by a sound I'll never forget, a wail that didn't sound human. It started low and rose to this blood-curdling pitch that had me fumbling for my phone to call 911. I wasn't the only one who heard it. Several neighbors had called too. When the police arrived, they searched the Harrison property but reported finding nothing unusual. They said the Harrisons seemed confused by the disturbance and suggested it might have been an animal, but I knew what I heard wasn't an animal. The next day I decided enough was enough. I needed to know what was going on in that house. I waited until late afternoon when I noticed both Mr. and Mrs. Harrison leaving in their old station wagon. The first time I'd seen her outside. She was as tall and gaunt as her husband, with long gray hair that hung like a curtain around her pale face. Once they were gone, I walked over to their house, telling myself I was just being a concerned neighbor checking on things. Their front porch was immaculate now, with potted plants that hadn't been there the day before. As I approached the door, I noticed something partially hidden behind one of the plants, a weathered notebook. I don't know what compelled me to take it, but I did, quickly shoving it under my shirt before heading back home. The notebook was filled with the strangest things, symbols I didn't recognize, drawings of what looked like star charts, and pages of writing in a language I couldn't identify. But what made my blood run cold was finding my name on one of the pages, alongside what appeared to be a crude map of my house. There were markings on the map, concentrated around my bedroom. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept hearing noises, scratching at my windows, footsteps on my porch, whispers just outside my bedroom door. But every time I checked, there was nothing there. I told myself it was just my imagination running wild after finding that notebook. The next day, I noticed Mr. Harrison was back to digging in his yard. This time, he was working on a spot much closer to the fence that separated our properties. I watched from my kitchen window as he removed something from the ground, something wrapped in cloth that he quickly carried to a shed at the back of their property. I should have minded my own business. I should have started packing that very moment. Instead, I waited until nightfall, when the lights in their house went out. I snuck over to their property and made my way to the shed. The door wasn't locked. It opened with a slight creak that seemed deafening in the quiet night. The smell hit me first, a musty metallic odor that made me gag. I used my phone's flashlight to look around and immediately wished I hadn't. The shed was filled with things that had no business being there. Old books bound in what looked like leather but didn't quite seem like any leather I'd ever seen. Candles arranged in a circle on the floor, some half melted, and jars filled with liquids and objects I couldn't identify. In the center was a table with straps attached to its sides. I was backing out of the shed when my light caught something hanging on the wall. Photographs, dozens of them showing different houses in our neighborhood. Each photo had been marked with the same symbols from the notebook. My house was there too, with fresh markings that hadn't been in the notebook. As I turned to leave, my flashlight beam landed on Mr. Harrison, standing in the doorway. He was watching me with that same unblinking stare, but this time he was smiling, not a friendly smile, His lips were pulled back too far, showing too many teeth. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice surprisingly soft and musical for such a gaunt man. "But perhaps it's better this way. We've been waiting for someone like you." I don't remember pushing past him. I don't remember running back to my house. I just remember locking every door and window, then sitting in my bathroom with a kitchen knife until morning came. I put my house on the market that day, took a massive loss selling it so quickly, but I didn't care. I stayed with a friend until the paperwork went through, and I never went back to the house except to have movers get my things while I waited in the car. Before I left Austin for good, I drove by the old neighborhood one last time. The Harrison house was dark and quiet, no sign of anyone coming or going. I later learned from the real estate agent who sold my house that the Harrisons had vanished. Even stranger, according to city records, that house had been abandoned for over a year before I even moved in. I don't know who those people were or what they wanted. I don't know what was in that shed or why they had my name and photos of my house. All I know is that 5 years later, I still wake up sometimes hearing that chanting in my dreams. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I swear I can feel someone watching me with that same unblinking stare. Story 11. I've been an officer in Coldwater for 8 years now. It's a small town in Alabama where nothing much happens, usually just noise complaints, domestic disputes, and the occasional DUI. That all changed 3 nights ago. I was working the night shift like I always do. It was around 2 in the morning, that dead time when even the drunks have gone home and the early risers aren't up yet. I was parked behind the old gas station on Maple, nursing a lukewarm coffee and filling out paperwork on a fender bender from earlier. That's when the call came in. "Dispatch to Unit 4, we've got a distress call from the Jenkins place on Holloway Road." I remember feeling confused. The Jenkins house has been abandoned for years, almost a decade now. Old man Jenkins died, and his kids wanted nothing to do with the property. It's become one of those local landmarks teenagers dare each other to visit. "Dispatch, can you confirm that address? That house is abandoned." "Confirmed, Unit 4. Call came from a landline registered to that address. Female caller sounded distressed before the line went dead." That didn't make any sense. The utilities at that place were cut off years ago. I told dispatch I'd check it out, but honestly, I figured it was probably some kids messing around. The Jenkins place sits about a half-mile back from the main road, at the end of a gravel driveway that winds through a stand of oak trees. It was a moonless night, and as I turned onto the property, my headlights cut through a thick blanket of fog that had settled in the low areas. The temperature display on my dashboard read 42 degrees, but it felt colder. The house came into view as I rounded the final bend, a 2-story Victorian with peeling white paint and boarded-up windows. The porch sagged on one side where the foundation had settled. I pulled up to the front and left my engine running, the cruiser's headlights illuminating the front of the house. I radioed my position to dispatch and stepped out. The silence hit me immediately. No crickets, no distant traffic, nothing but the idling engine of my cruiser. I grabbed my maglite and swept the beam across the front of the house. That's when I noticed the front door was ajar. Now, I'm not a superstitious man. I don't buy into the local ghost stories about the Jenkins place, how old man Jenkins went crazy and did terrible things before he died. But standing there looking at that open door, I felt something I hadn't felt since my first week on the job. Genuine unease. Protocol says I should have waited for backup for a possible break-in, but we were short-staffed that night. Besides, I figured it was just some kids who'd run out the back when they heard my car. I approached the porch, my hand resting on my holstered weapon. The wooden steps creaked under my weight. I called out, "Police officer, anyone inside?" My voice sounded flat in the dense air. No response. I drew my gun and held my flashlight in my support hand, nudging the door open wider with my foot. The hinges groaned, and I was hit with the musty smell of abandonment, dust, mold, rotting wood. But there was something else underneath it all, something metallic. Blood has a distinct smell. Anyone who's worked in law enforcement long enough knows it. And that's what I was smelling, faint but unmistakable. I stepped inside, sweeping my light across the foyer. Dust covered everything: the floor, the banister of the staircase, the remains of furniture left behind. My footprints were clearly visible in the layer of dust on the hardwood floor, but there were others too. Multiple sets, recent. "Police, if anyone's here, make yourself known." The house creaked around me as I moved deeper inside. The blood smell grew stronger. I checked the living room, empty except for a sheet-covered couch and a broken coffee table. The kitchen was the same: abandoned appliances, cabinets hanging open. As I moved through the first floor, I noticed something odd about the footprints. They all led in one direction, toward a door at the back of the house, a door that I knew led to the basement. I radioed dispatch again. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I'm inside the Jenkins house, signs of recent activity. I'm going to check the basement. Send backup when available." The radio crackled with static before dispatch responded, their voice breaking up. "Unit 4, can't hear, repeat." Then nothing but static. I tried again but got the same result. Cell service out here was always spotty, and my radio was apparently having issues too. I decided to proceed, check the basement quickly, and then head back outside to try the radio again. The basement door was partially open. The blood smell was definitely coming from down there. I shined my light down a set of wooden stairs that disappeared into darkness. The air coming up from below was cold and damp. I still remember thinking I should turn around. Every instinct was telling me to get out, wait for backup, but I kept thinking about that call, a woman in distress. What if someone was hurt down there? I started down the stairs, testing each step before putting my full weight on it. The wood was rotted in places, and the last thing I needed was to fall through. The smell grew stronger with each step, and my flashlight beam caught dust motes swirling in the air. The basement was larger than I expected, divided into several rooms. My light revealed concrete floors, stone walls, and rusted pipes running along the ceiling. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. The air was thick and hard to breathe. I moved slowly, checking each room. Empty, empty, empty. Then I found it, a heavy metal door at the far end of the basement. It looked out of place, newer than the rest of the house, with a padlock hanging open from the hasp. The smell of blood was overwhelming now. I tried the radio one more time. Nothing but static, louder than before. I approached the door, sweat running down my back despite the cold. The lock was open, but the door was closed. I reached out and pulled it open. The hinges moved silently, too silently for something that old. Inside was a small concrete cell, maybe 8 by 10 feet, and sitting against the far wall was a woman. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with long dark hair that hung over her face. Her wrists were shackled to the wall with heavy chains. Her clothes were torn and stained dark with what could only be blood. But what made my blood run cold was her face when she looked up at me. Her mouth was sewn shut with thick black thread, her eyes wide with terror. She made a muffled sound and shook her head violently. I holstered my weapon and rushed to her. "It's okay. I'm a police officer. I'm going to get you out of here." I reached for the chains, looking for a way to release them. That's when I felt the air in the room change. It became heavier, colder. The woman's eyes fixed on something behind me, and her muffled cries grew frantic. I turned to find the doorway empty, but when I looked back at the woman, she was gone. Just gone. The chains hung empty against the wall, no sign that anyone had been there at all. I spun around, drawing my weapon again. "Police officer, show yourself!" The door slammed shut with a deafening bang. I ran to it, pulling on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. My radio crackled to life, startling me. Through the static, I heard a voice. Deep, guttural, unlike any human voice I'd ever heard. "You're too late. She's mine now." I tried the door again, throwing my shoulder against it, but it was like hitting solid rock. My flashlight began to flicker, the beam growing weaker. "Who's there?" "Identify yourself," I shouted, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. The temperature dropped suddenly, my breath fogging in front of my face. The The darkness in the corners of the room seemed to thicken, to move. I am the darkness. The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. I've lived in this house for generations. Jenkins knew me well. A figure began to take shape in the darkness. Tall, impossibly thin, with limbs too long for its body. Its skin was a pale, sickly grey, stretched tight over a skeletal frame, and its eyes, God, its eyes were glowing red pinpricks in the darkness. I fired my weapon, once, twice, 3 times. The shots were deafeningly loud in the small space, the muzzle flash momentarily lighting up the room. But the figure didn't flinch. The bullets seemed to pass through it. It smiled then, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. "Your weapons can't harm me, Officer Carter. I know your name. I know all about you." It knew my name. How could it know my name? "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What I've always wanted. What I took from her. What I'll take from you." It moved toward me, its movements jerky and unnatural, like watching a spider crawl. I backed away until I hit the wall, my flashlight finally dying, leaving only the red glow of its eyes in the darkness. "You shouldn't have come here," it said, its voice now right beside my ear. "But I'm glad you did. It's been so long since I had a new voice to add to my collection." I felt cold fingers on my neck, my face circling my mouth. I tried to scream, to fight, but my body wouldn't respond. I was paralyzed. "They'll come looking for me," I managed to say. The thing laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Let them come. I'll be waiting, just like I waited for you." The last thing I remember clearly is those eyes, moving closer, filling my vision. And pain, unimaginable pain, as something sharp pierced my skin over and over. I don't know how I got out. I woke up in my cruiser, parked at the gas station on Maple, my paperwork still on the seat beside me. The clock on the dashboard read 2:15 in the morning, only minutes after I received the call, but my uniform was covered in dust. My weapon was empty, all rounds fired, and when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw them, tiny, almost invisible black threads at the corners of my mouth. I drove straight to the station and told the chief everything. They sent a team to the Jenkins house at first light. They found my cruiser parked outside, engine still running, driver's door open. Inside the house, they found footprints in the dust matching my boots, leading to the basement. They found the metal door standing open, but there was no cell beyond it, just an empty storage room with concrete walls. No chains, no blood, no woman. Just my police radio on the floor, still crackling with static. The official report says I'm missing, presumed dead. But I know the truth. I'm not dead. I'm trapped. Sometimes I can see through my eyes, feel my hands, hear my voice calling for help in the fog. But it's not me controlling them anymore. It's the darkness, and it's still hungry. Story 12. It was around 2 in the morning, middle of October. The night was cold, clear, with one of those full moons that makes everything look weird and washed out. I was doing my usual patrol route when the call came in. Mrs. Peterson from across the street reported strange noises coming from the Johnson house on Maple. Said she heard banging and what sounded like a child crying. Now the Johnson house has been empty for almost 7 years. The family just vanished one day. Mom, Dad, and their little girl, Sarah. Left everything behind. Clothes in the closets, food in the fridge, car in the garage. Search parties combed the woods for weeks. Some people think they took off to escape debt. Others say the dad killed them all. But nobody actually knows. I'd driven past that house hundreds of times but never went inside. It's one of those places everyone in town avoids. Kids dare each other to touch the front door on Halloween. The realtor can't sell it because of the rumors. I pulled up outside around 2:15, killed the engine, and sat there for a minute just looking at the place. 2-story Victorian, paint peeling off like skin, porch sagging in the middle. The moonlight hit it in a way that made the windows look like eyes. Thought about calling for backup, but what would I say? I need assistance for a possible ghost? No way. The front yard was overgrown, weeds up to my knees. As I walked up the path, I noticed something weird. There was a clear trail through the high grass, like someone had been walking here recently. The porch steps creaked under my weight. Each sound seemed 10 times louder in the quiet. That's when I noticed the front door was open. Not wide open, just cracked about an inch or two. I shined my flashlight through the gap but couldn't see much. I announced myself, "Pine Hill Police, anyone inside?" and pushed the door open with my foot. The smell hit me first, not rot or anything like that. It was mustiness mixed with something else, like old perfume. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing the living room. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, but it was all still there. Couch, TV, family photos on the mantel. It looked like the Johnsons had just stepped out for a minute and never came back. My radio crackled, making me jump. Dispatch asking for a status update. I reported that I was inside, checking the premises. My voice echoed through the empty house. When I stopped talking, the silence felt heavy, like it was pressing in on me. I moved through the first floor. Kitchen with dishes still in the sink. Dining room with 4 chairs pulled out from the table. The dust was thick everywhere except I noticed something odd. There were areas where the dust had been disturbed, like someone had been touching things. Not cleaning, just touching. Running their fingers over surfaces. Then I heard it. A thump from upstairs, like something heavy had fallen. I froze, listening. Another thump, followed by what sounded like footsteps. Light ones. My hand went to my gun. "This is Officer Harris. If anyone's up there, identify yourself now." No response, just more soft footsteps. Logic said it was probably just some teenager who broke in on a dare, or a homeless person seeking shelter. But something felt wrong. The air felt charged, like right before a thunderstorm. I unholstered my weapon and started up the stairs, each step creaking louder than the last. The upstairs hallway was narrow, with 4 doors leading off it, all of them closed except the one at the very end. Moonlight spilled out from that room, casting long shadows. As I moved toward it, I swear the temperature dropped at least 10 degrees. I could see my breath clouding in front of me. The open door led to a child's bedroom. Pink wallpaper peeling off the walls, a small bed with a faded quilt, toy chest in the corner. This must have been Sarah's room. My flashlight beam caught something on the floor, a small teddy bear worn with age. I holstered my gun and bent down to pick it up. The fur was matted and dirty, one eye missing, but it seemed so out of place in all that dust. I turned the bear over in my hands, and that's when I heard something behind me. A soft exhale, like someone breathing right next to my ear. I spun around, but there was no one there. When I looked back down, the bear was gone. Just gone. I searched the floor, thinking I must have dropped it, but it had vanished. My heart was pounding now. I got down on my hands and knees to look under the bed, thinking maybe the bear had somehow slid under there. Instead, I found a small silver locket. I pulled it out and dusted it off. It was engraved with the initials S.J., Sarah Johnson. As I stood up, the flashlight flickered, once, twice, then went out completely. The only light came from the moon through the window, and that's when I noticed the shadows were moving, not shifting with the light, actually moving, like they were alive. They seemed to be reaching toward me. The room got colder, so cold it hurt to breathe. I tried to call dispatch, but my radio just gave off static. I decided it was time to get the hell out of there. As I turned toward the door, it slammed shut with a bang that shook the whole room. I lunged for the handle, but it was ice cold, so cold it burned my palm when I grabbed it. The door wouldn't budge. I put my shoulder into it, once, twice. On the third try, it flew open so suddenly I stumbled into the hallway. That's when I heard it, giggling, a little girl's laugh, high and sweet, coming from somewhere behind me. Then something brushed against my back, not like bumping into me, but like fingers deliberately running down my spine. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. 20 years on the force, and I ran like a scared kid. Down the hallway, down the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. I could hear footsteps behind me, light and quick. The laughter followed me, echoing off the walls. When I reached the front door, I realized I was still clutching the locket in my hand. I threw it back into the house and burst out onto the porch. The night air hit me like a slap, warm compared to the freezing temperature inside. I made it to my cruiser and sat there gasping for breath, hands shaking too bad to put the key in the ignition. I looked back at the house. In an upstairs window, Sarah's bedroom window, I saw a small, pale face looking down at me. Not a living child's face. It was too white, too still. Then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. I radioed for backup, told them I'd found evidence of trespassing and needed assistance to secure the scene. I didn't mention the other stuff. How could I? They'd think I was crazy or drunk. 2 other officers arrived about 15 minutes later. We searched the entire house together, room by room. They didn't feel anything strange. The temperature was normal. Sarah's bedroom looked the same, except the locket was lying in the middle of the floor, even though I'd thrown it from the bottom of the stairs. We found no signs of anyone else having been there. No footprints in the dust except mine and now theirs. No teddy bear. When I described the face in the window, they exchanged looks. I knew what they were thinking. It's been 24 hours now. I haven't slept. I can't stop thinking about that house, about Sarah, about what might have happened to her and her family. The weird thing is, when I got home and took off my jacket, I found something in my pocket, a small button, like from a child's dress, with a bit of pink thread still attached. The chief wants me to take a few days off, says I've been working too hard. Maybe he's right. Maybe I imagined the whole thing, but I keep thinking about that locket, how it felt in my hand, so cold. And I swear, as we were leaving the house, I heard that same soft giggle and felt something tug at my sleeve. I don't know what happened in that house 7 years ago, but whatever it was, it isn't over. And I don't think the Johnsons ever left. I'm typing this up now because I need to put it somewhere. I need someone to know what happened. Because I'm going back there tonight, off duty, without backup. I need to know what happened to that little girl. Maybe I can help her somehow, or maybe I'm losing my mind. If something happens to me, at least now someone knows where to look. Story 13. I still can't sleep right. It's been 3 weeks since that night on Highway 10, and I keep thinking if I close my eyes too long, I'll open them and be back there. Back on that stretch of road, where nothing makes sense. I'm writing this down partly to get it out of my head and partly because I need someone to tell me I'm not losing my mind. I've been driving trucks for 15 years, coast to coast, border to border. Night driving was always my preference. Less traffic, cooler temps, and the kind of solitude that lets a man think. That night, I was hauling electronics from Austin to San Diego, a run I'd made dozens of times before. The dispatcher had called me late, asking if I could take over for another driver who'd gotten sick. The pay was good for the quick turnaround, so I agreed. Looking back, I wish I'd told them to find someone else. I left Austin around 9 in the evening. The first few hours were normal, just me, my thermos of coffee, and the rumble of 18 wheels on asphalt. The radio kept me company until I hit West Texas, where the stations faded to static one by one. By 2 in the morning, I was deep into that no man's land between El Paso and Las Cruces. Anyone who's driven that stretch knows what I'm talking about. There's something about those desert highways at night, the way the darkness seems to press in from all sides, how the stars hang so low you feel like you could reach up and touch them. My coffee had gone cold, and I was debating whether to pull over and heat it up when I noticed the lights in my mirror, blue and red, flashing against the cab interior. My first thought was to check my speed. I was doing 67 under the limit. My logs were in order, and I'd done my pre-trip inspection. There was no reason for a stop. I pulled onto the shoulder anyway, force of habit, I guess. Through my side mirror, I watched a patrol car stop about 20 feet behind me. The headlights stayed on, blinding in the darkness, but only one door opened. A tall figure stepped out, had to be 6'4" at least, and started walking toward my truck. I rolled down my window and got my license ready, but something felt off. The officer moved. Wrong. Too stiff, too measured, like each step was precisely calculated. And where was his flashlight? Every cop I've ever been stopped by lit me up like a Christmas tree before they got within 10 feet. When he reached my door, he just stood there, silent. His face was hidden in shadow, tilted down so the brim of his hat covered everything above his mouth. "Evening, officer," I said. "Did I do something wrong?" Nothing. No response, just that unnatural stillness. I tried again. "Sir, is there a problem with my truck?" When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, emotionless, like someone reading words they didn't understand. "Step out of the vehicle." "Can I ask why? My logs are current and I wasn't speeding." More silence. Then, "Step out of the vehicle now." I've dealt with power-tripping cops before, but something about this was different. Wrong. The hair on my arm stood up. "I'd like to see your badge first, please," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. That's when he moved. Fast. Too fast. His hand shot out and grabbed my wrist with a grip that felt like steel cable. Cold. His skin was so cold, it burned. "You will exit the vehicle," he said, and this time his head tilted up just enough that I could see his face in the dim light from my dash. God help me. Where his eyes should have been were just holes. Empty, black voids. Not gouged out, there was no blood or scarring, just absolute darkness, like looking into a well at midnight. I'm not ashamed to admit I screamed. Pure instinct took over and I yanked my arm back with everything I had. His grip was inhumanly strong, but something in me found strength I didn't know I had. My wrist slipped free and I slammed the window button, catching his fingers as the glass closed. He didn't flinch, didn't yell, just stood there with his fingers pinched in my window, staring at me with those non-eyes. Then he slowly pulled his hand free. The glass should have broken his fingers, but they slid out like they were made of smoke. I threw the truck into gear and floored it. The tires spun on the gravel before catching, and then I was back on the highway, pushing 90 within seconds. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely breathe. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see those flashing lights gaining on me, but the road behind me stayed dark. For maybe 5 minutes, I thought I'd escaped. Then my radio switched on by itself. It had been dead air for the last hour, but suddenly it crackled to life with a burst of static that made me jump. Through the white noise, a voice, the same flat, dead voice, spoke. "You can't run. You can't hide. Dead men tell no tales." I hit the power button, but the voice continued. I yanked the knob clean off, but it didn't matter. The voice just got louder. "The highway claims what's rightfully its own. How many miles before your wheels fail? How many heartbeats before you join us?" I was shaking so hard I could barely keep the wheels steady. 20 miles ahead, a small light appeared on the horizon. As I got closer, I could make out a sign. "Sunset, rest, stop. Open 24 hours. I've never been so happy to see a shabby roadside building in my life. I pulled in so fast I nearly jackknifed the trailer. The place looked half abandoned, just a small convenience store with a couple of gas pumps out front. Only one flickering light was on inside, but at that moment it looked like salvation. I didn't even shut off the engine properly, just threw it in park, yanked the keys, and ran for the door. The radio in my truck was still broadcasting that voice, growing more distorted with every word. The bell above the door jingled as I burst inside, but no one came to greet me. The store was empty. No customers, no clerk, just rows of dusty snacks and a cooler humming in the corner. "Hello," I called out. "Is anyone here? I need help." Silence. I moved to the counter where an old landline phone sat. I picked it up, but instead of a dial tone, I heard breathing. Slow, measured breathing. I slammed the phone down and backed away. That's when the radio behind the counter switched on, an ancient transistor model that looked like it belonged in a museum. Through a burst of static, that same voice, "Welcome to the rest stop, John. We've been waiting for you." It knew my name. How the hell did it know my name? I ran for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The handle turned, but it was like something on the other side was holding it shut. I spun around, looking for another exit. when the lights flickered once, twice, and went out completely. In the darkness, I heard footsteps, heavy boots on linoleum, then a click, and a single light came on behind the counter, illuminating him, the officer, standing there like he'd been there all along. "The road is mine," he said, his mouth barely moving. "Your soul is mine." He started walking toward me, moving with that same wrong rhythm. In the harsh light, I could see his face clearly now. The uniform was old, decades out of date. The badge was tarnished black. And those eyes, those empty voids seemed to pull at me, like gravity wells trying to suck me in. I backed up until I hit a shelf, sending packages of beef jerky cascading to the floor. My hand closed around something solid, a heavy flashlight from a display. When he got within arm's reach, I swung it with everything I had. The flashlight passed through him like he was made of fog. His expression never changed. But for just a second, the store around us flickered, like reality itself was unstable. That's when I noticed a door behind the counter marked "Employees Only." I vaulted over the counter, my boots skidding on something wet. I didn't look down to see what, and crashed through the door. Instead of a storeroom, I found myself stumbling onto asphalt. Somehow, impossibly, I was back on Highway 10. The store was gone. My truck was gone. Just empty desert stretching for miles under a canopy of cold stars. I spun in a circle, disoriented and terrified. This wasn't possible. None of this was possible. From far down the highway came the sound of an engine. I turned to see headlights approaching, massive, bright headlights set high off the ground. A truck. My salvation. I moved to the shoulder and started waving my arms, desperate to flag it down. The truck didn't slow. If anything, it accelerated, the engine roaring louder as it bore down on me. As it got closer, I realized with growing horror that it was my truck, my rig, but somehow wrong. The metal was rusted through in places, the paint faded and peeling, and behind the wheel sat a figure in a patrol hat, those empty eye sockets fixed on me as the truck barreled forward. I tried to run, but my feet wouldn't move, like they were glued to the asphalt. The last thing I heard was the screech of brakes and that voice, now all around me inside my head, saying, "The graveyard shift never ends." Then darkness, complete darkness. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital in Las Cruces. They told me I'd been found unconscious on the shoulder of Highway 10, my truck idling 20 yards away. Severe dehydration and exhaustion, they said. Hallucinations brought on by sleep deprivation. But they couldn't explain the bruise on my wrist, 5 finger marks, black as frostbite. Or why my radio won't work anymore no matter how many times it's replaced. Or why, sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still hear that voice counting down the miles until it finds me again. I quit driving after that, sold my rig, moved to the city where I'm never alone on the road. But sometimes, late at night, my phone will ring, and when I answer, there's nothing but static, and underneath it, barely audible, the sound of breathing. I don't drive at night anymore. I don't think I ever will again. Story 14. I still can't sleep properly. I keep waking up in a cold sweat, thinking I'm back there in that impossible space where nothing made sense. It's been 3 weeks since I got off that damn ship, and I'm still trying to process what happened. I need to write this down. Maybe it'll help me make sense of it. Or maybe someone out there has experienced something similar and can tell me I'm not losing my mind. I never wanted to go on that cruise in the first place. I'm Evan, 29, and I've been working my ass off at the law firm where I'm trying to make partner. My girlfriend Melanie had been planning this trip for months, a luxury vacation on the MS Valhalla, the biggest cruise ship in the world, on its maiden voyage. "It'll be romantic," she said. "You need to relax," she said. If I'd known what would happen, I would have worked straight through Christmas rather than set foot on that floating nightmare. The first day was fine, I guess. The ship was impressive, I'll give it that. 18 decks, 5 swimming pools, a shopping mall, theaters, bars, restaurants, everything you could imagine. Our cabin was on deck 12 with a private balcony, the works. Melanie was thrilled, taking pictures of everything, dragging me around to explore. I was still answering work emails, which pissed her off, but I had cases that couldn't wait. It was the second night when things started to get weird. We were at dinner in the main dining room, some fancy 5-course meal. I remember I was cutting into this overcooked steak when the entire ship shuddered. Not like the normal vibration from the engines. This was different, like the whole structure shifted sideways for a second. My wine glass tipped over, spilling red all over the white tablecloth. Then the lights went out, just for maybe 10 seconds, but it felt longer in that crowded room. People gasped, a few nervous laughs. When the lights came back on, the captain's voice came over the PA system, smooth and reassuring, saying it was just a minor electrical issue, nothing to worry about. Everyone went back to their meals, but I couldn't shake this feeling that something was off. The next morning, Melanie wanted to hit the pool. I told her I needed coffee first, so I headed to this little cafe on deck 8. While I was waiting in line, I overheard these 2 crew members talking in hushed voices. They didn't realize I was listening. "They've been searching all night," one said. "No sign of him anywhere." "That's the 3rd this year," the other replied. "Same thing happened on the test voyages." "Keep your voice down. They'll fire us if passengers find out." I didn't think much of it at first. Then at lunch, I overheard more whispers from a nearby table. A middle-aged couple was talking about a man in their dinner group who hadn't shown up for breakfast. The woman was saying how the man's wife was freaking out because he'd gone to get ice around midnight and never came back. That's when I started paying attention. I noticed increased crew activity, staff members talking into radios, security personnel moving with purpose. When I asked a steward if everything was okay, his smile was too bright, too rehearsed. "Just routine safety checks, sir, nothing to worry about." After lunch, I told Melanie I needed to make some work calls and would meet her at the pool later. Instead, I started wandering around the ship. I don't know why I felt compelled to investigate. Maybe the lawyer in me, always looking for inconsistencies. That's when I found it. On deck 4, near the back of the ship, there was a section cordoned off with those retractable belt barriers. A sign read, "Closed for maintenance, crew only." What struck me as odd was that this area wasn't on any of the ship maps. It was like a blind spot. I was standing there trying to peek past the barrier when a crew member approached me. "Can I help you find something, sir?" His name tag said Miguel. "Just exploring," I said. "What kind of maintenance are they doing?" Miguel's smile faltered for just a second. "Just some electrical work from last night's issue. Should be open again tomorrow." "Weird place for electrical work," I said. "Isn't this just passenger cabins?" "Actually, sir, that's a service corridor. Not very interesting." He was already trying to guide me away. "The casino is having a special poker tournament starting in 20 minutes if you're interested." I let him lead me away, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. At dinner that night, the captain made an announcement thanking everyone for their patience during the minor technical difficulties and assured us the rest of the voyage would be smooth sailing. No mention of a missing passenger. Melanie was exhausted from swimming and drinking all day, so she crashed early, around 10. I pretended to watch TV until her breathing deepened, then I slipped out of our cabin. I know it was stupid, but I had to check out that cordoned-off area again. The ship was quieter at night, but not deserted. People were still at the bars, the casino, the late-night movie. I took the stairs down to deck 4 and made my way back to the restricted section. The barrier was still there, but no crew members were around. I looked both ways, then ducked under the belt. The hallway beyond looked normal at first, just a standard ship corridor with numbered cabin doors. But about halfway down, the carpeting changed to a darker color, and the lighting was dimmer. The air felt different too, colder, with a faint smell I couldn't place. Something like ozone mixed with salt water, but not quite. I tried a few door handles, all locked, until I reached one at the very end of the hall. To my surprise, it opened easily. Beyond was another corridor, narrower, with metal walls instead of the fancy paneling in the rest of the ship. The lights here were just bare bulbs spaced far apart, casting long shadows. My heart was pounding, but curiosity pushed me forward. I'd gone maybe 50 feet when I heard it. A woman's voice behind me, soft but clear. "You shouldn't be here." I nearly jumped out of my skin. Turning around, I saw her. A woman in a crew uniform, but something was off about her. She was pale, too pale, and there was a strange translucence to her, like I could almost see the wall behind her if I looked at her from the right angle. Her name tag read, Elise. "This area is restricted," she said. Her voice had an echo to it, like she was speaking in a much larger space than this narrow corridor. "I'm looking for the bathroom," I lied lamely. She didn't smile. "No, you're not. You're looking for answers about the missing passenger." My mouth went dry. "You know about that? There have been others. There will be more." She moved closer, and I noticed she made no sound when she walked, no footsteps. "You should go back to your cabin, to your girlfriend. Forget this place." "What's happening on this ship?" I asked. She just stared at me, then pointed further down the corridor. "If you go through that door, you'll see, but then you'll never be able to unsee it." I should have listened to her. God, why didn't I listen? But instead, I thanked her and continued down the corridor. At the end was a heavy metal door with a small porthole window. I looked back, but the woman, Elise, was gone, just vanished. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open, and that's when everything I thought I knew about reality collapsed. Beyond the door wasn't another room or corridor. It was nothing. A vast, impossible void, stretching infinitely in all directions. Not darkness exactly, but not light either. A space that hurt my eyes to look at, like my brain couldn't process what it was seeing. And floating in this void, maybe 20 feet away, was a man, just suspended there in midair with his back to me. He was wearing casual clothes, khakis and a blue polo shirt. He wasn't moving, just hanging there like a puppet with cut strings. Around him, all through this impossible space, were whispers, countless voices speaking in languages I'd never heard, overlapping, rising and falling like waves. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was hungry, eager. I stood frozen in the doorway, my mind screaming that what I was seeing couldn't exist. The laws of physics don't allow for an infinite void inside a cruise ship. The man couldn't be floating there. None of this could be real. Then the whispers changed, becoming excited, and I realized with horror they were reacting to my presence. The suspended man slowly began to turn around. I didn't want to see his face. Every instinct told me not to look, but I couldn't move, couldn't look away. As he rotated toward me, I saw his face was wrong. His eyes were just empty sockets, black and bottomless, and his mouth was stretched open in a silent scream that never ended. That's when I finally found the will to move. I stumbled backward, trying to slam the door shut, but it wouldn't close. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I felt something like invisible fingers grabbing at my clothes, my skin, trying to pull me in. "I told you." It was Elise, suddenly beside me. She grabbed my arm, her touch ice cold, and pulled me back. Together we forced the door closed. The moment it latched, the whispers cut off, and the oppressive feeling vanished. I collapsed against the wall, gasping. What the fuck was that? What's happening on this ship? Elise looked at me with sad eyes. They built too big, reached too far. Some spaces shouldn't exist, but they made them anyway. Now it's awake and hungry. What's awake? What are you talking about? She just shook her head. Get off this ship at the next port, take your girlfriend and leave. Then she walked away, down the corridor, and when she turned a corner, I ran after her, but she was gone. Just gone, like she'd never been there. I made it back to our cabin somehow. Melanie was still asleep, oblivious. I sat in the bathroom all night, shaking, trying to convince myself I'd hallucinated the whole thing. The next morning, the ship was buzzing with news. 2 more passengers had vanished overnight. A young honeymooning couple from Deck 7. The crew was saying they must have fallen overboard, but I knew better. I knew. I convinced Melanie we had to get off at the next port, told her I had a work emergency that couldn't wait. She was pissed, but eventually agreed. We were supposed to dock in St. Thomas the next day. That final day was the longest of my life. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that floating man whenever I closed my eyes, hearing those hungry whispers. Twice I thought I saw Elise watching me from a distance, but when I looked again, she was gone. We did make it off in St. Thomas. I paid a fortune for last-minute flights back to Miami. Melanie broke up with me a week later, said I'd ruined our vacation for no reason and had been acting crazy. Maybe I am crazy, but I know what I saw in that impossible room. And the worst part, I've been researching the MS Valhalla since I got back, found some obscure maritime forums where crew members post anonymously. The ship has had incidents on every voyage since, more disappearances. The company covers them up, calls them accidents, or says people fell overboard. But I know the truth. Something ancient and hungry lives in that impossible void at the heart of the Valhalla, and it's still out there, sailing from port to port, feeding. I don't know why I was allowed to leave when others weren't. Sometimes I wonder if Elise saved me, or if whatever lives in that void just wasn't hungry enough that night. All I know is I'll never set foot on a ship again. And if you're reading this and planning a cruise on the Valhalla, cancel it. Stay away. That ship doesn't just carry passengers, it delivers them. Story 15. I never wanted to write this down, but I need to get it off my chest. It's been 3 years since it happened, and I still wake up in cold sweats some nights. I've been driving trucks for almost 15 years now, and nothing, absolutely nothing, has ever come close to what I experienced that night in Hollow Pass, Wyoming. It was December 21st, 2019. I remember the date because it was the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. Fitting, I guess. I was hauling a load of auto parts from Denver to Salt Lake City, a route I'd driven dozens of times before. The weather forecast had warned about a blizzard coming in, but dispatch was pushing hard for deliveries before Christmas, and I needed the hours. You know how it is when you're trying to make ends meet. Sometimes you make stupid decisions. I left Denver around noon, figuring I'd beat the worst of the storm. My rig was running good, I had a thermos full of coffee, and my playlist was set up. The snow started coming down around 2 in the afternoon, but nothing major. Just those big lazy flakes that make everything look like a Christmas card. I wasn't worried yet. By 4, though, things had taken a turn. The wind picked up, visibility dropped to maybe 50 feet at times, and the temperature was plummeting. I was approaching the Wyoming border when I should have made the call to find a place to park for the night. But there's this stubborn streak in me that my ex-wife used to hate. Once I set my mind on something, I have trouble backing down. I kept pushing through as darkness fell, and by 6 I was fully committed to the route through Hollow Pass. It's this narrow stretch of highway that winds through a mountain valley, beautiful in summer, absolutely treacherous in winter. Most truckers avoid it when there's even a hint of bad weather, but it saves about 2 hours compared to the alternate route. The CB radio had been quiet most of the day. Not many drivers crazy enough to be out in that weather, I guess. But around 7:30, as I was approaching the pass entrance, I picked up a transmission. Anyone on Hollow Pass, turn around. Get out while you can, it's not safe tonight. The voice was male, calm but urgent. Lots of static. I figured it was another trucker warning about the road conditions. This is Connor Hayes eastbound on the approach to Hollow Pass. What's the situation up there, good buddy? I responded. Nothing but static for maybe 30 seconds then. Connor, listen to me. This isn't about the weather. Turn around. Take the long way. Something's wrong up here tonight. I laughed it off. You get all kinds on the CB, practical jokers, guys who've been driving too long without sleep, even some who like to scare the rookies. I'd heard all sorts of stories about Hollow Pass over the years. Ghost trucks, phantom hitchhikers, the usual stuff truckers talk about to keep themselves awake on long hauls. Appreciate the concern, but I'm pushing through. Got a deadline to meet, I replied. The voice came back immediately, clearer this time. Please, I'm begging you. Nobody should be on this road tonight. Then the radio went dead. Not just the conversation, the whole thing. Complete silence. I fiddled with the knobs, checked the connections, but nothing. Figured it was the storm interfering with the signal. By now I was at the entrance to the pass. The snow was coming down so hard it was like driving through a white tunnel. My wipers were barely keeping up. The road was slick, and I had to crawl along at maybe 20 miles per hour. The mountains loomed on either side, just dark shapes against the night sky. My headlights barely penetrated the swirling snow. About 20 minutes into the pass, I saw something ahead on the road. I slowed even further and squinted through the windshield. It was a truck, jackknifed across both lanes. No lights, no movement. I pulled to a stop about 50 feet away and grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment. In hindsight, I should have just sat tight and called for help, but my phone had no signal, and my instinct was to check if anyone needed assistance. I pulled on my heavy coat, gloves, and hat before stepping out into the storm. The wind hit me like a physical blow, and the cold cut right through my clothes. I had to lean into the wind to walk toward the other truck. As I got closer, I could see it was an older model Peterbilt, dark blue. The driver's door was hanging open, swinging slightly in the wind. The cab was empty. I called out, but my voice was swallowed by the howling wind. That's when I noticed the footprints in the snow, a single set, leading from the truck into the trees beside the road, fresh ones, not yet filled in by the falling snow. What kind of idiot would leave their truck and head into the forest during a blizzard? I shined my flashlight toward the tree line. The footprints disappeared into the darkness between the pines. I should have turned around right then. Every instinct was screaming at me to get back in my truck and get the hell out of there. But I kept thinking about some poor bastard wandering through the woods, disoriented, freezing to death. I followed the footprints. The snow was deep, almost to my knees in places. The wind seemed to die down a bit once I got among the trees, but the cold was intense. My breath came out in thick white clouds. I kept calling out, but there was no response. I'd gone maybe 100 yards when I saw a figure standing with their back to me, about 30 feet ahead. "Hey!" I shouted. "You okay? Your truck's blocking the road back there." The figure didn't move or respond. As I got closer, I noticed two things that made my blood run cold. First, they were wearing what looked like tattered clothing, just a thin shirt and pants. No coat, no hat, no gloves, and most disturbing of all, no shoes, bare feet in the snow, in temperatures that had to be well below zero. Second, while I could see my own breath forming clouds in front of my face, there was nothing coming from them, no condensation at all. I stopped about 15 feet away. "Hey, buddy, you need help? You're gonna freeze to death out here." Slowly the figure began to turn around. I'll never forget what I saw next. It wasn't human, not entirely. It had the basic shape of a person, but everything was wrong. The face was pale, not just white, but a bloodless, corpse-like pallor that seemed to glow slightly in the darkness. The skin was stretched tight over the skull, like shrink wrap over bone. The eyes were hollow black pits, not just dark eyes, but actual cavities that seemed to extend back into the head. But the worst part was the smile. Its mouth was stretched impossibly wide, showing too many teeth, arranged in a way that no human mouth could manage. The grin extended almost from ear to ear. I stood frozen, my flashlight beam trembling on that terrible face. The thing tilted its head at an unnatural angle like a curious dog, but with a jerky, mechanical movement. Then it spoke. The voice was the same one I'd heard on the CB radio earlier. "Connor Hayes," it said, its mouth barely moving despite the words. "I told you to turn back." My legs nearly gave out. How did it know my name? I hadn't mentioned it when I stepped out of the truck. What are you?" I managed to stammer. The thing's head tilted further, almost to its shoulder now. "A warning. You need to leave. Now, before it finds you." "Before what finds me?" My voice was barely a whisper. The thing's smile somehow grew even wider. The hungry one, the one that waits in the pass, the one that calls to travelers on nights like this. It took a step toward me. I was like you once, didn't listen. Now I'm this. I started backing away. The thing matched my movements, step for step. Go, it hissed. Drive. Don't stop until morning. Don't look back. I turned and ran. I don't remember the trip back through the woods. One moment I was staring at that horrible face. The next I was bursting out of the tree line, slipping and sliding through the snow toward my truck. I kept expecting to feel cold hands grabbing at me from behind. I reached my rig, fumbled with the door handle with numb fingers, and practically threw myself into the cab. I locked the doors, cranked the engine, and turned the truck around, not caring that I nearly slid off the road twice in the process. As I was heading back the way I'd come, my CB radio suddenly crackled to life. Don't stop. It's still out there. I glanced at the radio in horror. The voice was clearer now, and I could hear a wet, bubbling quality to it, like someone speaking through a mouthful of liquid. I drove like a man possessed, ignoring the treacherous conditions. The windshield wipers beat a frantic rhythm as I navigated the winding road back out of the pass. Every few minutes, that voice would come through the radio again. Faster. It's following you. Don't look in the mirror. Of course, that last one made me immediately check my rearview mirror. In the darkness behind me, I thought I saw something moving along the road. Not walking, but gliding, as if it were floating just above the surface of the snow. I pressed the accelerator harder. It took me almost an hour to reach the truck stop at the entrance to the pass. By then, I was shaking so bad I could barely steer. I pulled in, parked, and just sat there for a while. Engine running, heater on full blast, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen was just my imagination, some trick of the storm and exhaustion. The truck stop was busy with drivers who'd had enough sense to wait out the blizzard. I decided to go inside, get some coffee, maybe talk to some people. Anything to feel normal again. I shut off the engine and was about to open the door when I noticed something on my windshield that made my heart stop. Footprints, bare footprints, pressed into the snow on the glass. They started at the bottom of the windshield and walked up and over the top of the cab. They hadn't been there when I'd parked. I started the engine again and drove straight out. Of there, took the long way around to Salt Lake City. I called my dispatcher and made up some story about mechanical trouble. I didn't care if they believed me or not. I've never driven Hollow Pass again. I'll take the extra hours every time. Sometimes, when I'm driving at night and the CB is quiet, I think I can hear that voice faint beneath the static, warning other drivers to stay away from the pass. I don't know what that thing was. I don't know what it was warning me about. If there really is something else out there, something worse, or if it was just trying to lure me deeper into the woods. All I know is that sometimes when I check my mirrors on a snowy night, I expect to see that face smiling back at me. And sometimes I swear I can see footprints on my windshield when I wake up in the morning, no matter where I park. Story 16. I've never told this story to anyone outside my immediate family. I'm not even sure why I'm writing it out now, except that I need to put these memories somewhere outside my head. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar, though I doubt it. My grandfather was a fire lookout ranger back in the 60s and 70s. He mostly worked towers in eastern Tennessee, and as a kid, I was obsessed with his stories about spotting smoke plumes miles away and radioing in coordinates. There was something romantic about the solitude, the responsibility, the connection to nature. When I graduated college 5 years ago, I started visiting old lookout towers as a hobby. Most are abandoned now, replaced by satellite technology, but many are still standing. Last summer, I found a box of my grandfather's old journals in my parents' attic. I'd known they existed, but had never read them. Flipping through, I noticed several entries from his time at Rich Mountain Tower, near the Tennessee-North Carolina border. What caught my attention wasn't the routine fire, spotting logs, but the personal notes scribbled in margins and on the backs of pages. June 12, 1972. Third night of footsteps on the stairs. Radio doesn't pick up any signal after midnight. June 19, 1972. Cannot sleep. Something watches from the tree line. Supervisor won't approve early rotation. July 1st, 1972. Found my boots placed neatly at the base of the tower this morning. I left them inside last night. The entries continued like this, growing increasingly disturbed, until suddenly they stopped. My grandfather switched to a different tower in August that year and never mentioned Rich Mountain in his journals again. When I asked my dad about it, he just shrugged and said, "Grandpa never liked talking about that summer. I should have left it at that." But I didn't. 2 weeks later, I packed my hiking gear and drove to Hot Springs, North Carolina. The ranger station had basic information about Rich Mountain. It was officially decommissioned in 1993, but still standing, occasionally used for emergency situations. When I casually mentioned my grandfather had worked there, the young ranger didn't seem interested. "That tower gets a lot of hikers," was all she said, marking the trail on my map. The hike up took about 4 hours. It was late July, hot and humid, but the forest was beautiful, thick with rhododendrons and mountain laurel. I'd planned to stay 2 nights, taking pictures and maybe finding whatever had spooked my grandfather. I told myself I was being ridiculous, probably just bears or local kids messing with the old man. Still, I brought extra batteries for my flashlight and a small canister of bear spray. The tower came into view around 4 in the afternoon. It was taller than I expected, about 60 feet high with a square cabin at the top. Metal stairs zigzagged up the side, and I could see they were rusted in places but still sturdy. The clearing around the base was overgrown, but showed signs of recent visitors, a fire ring, some trampled grass. I climbed the stairs carefully, testing each step before putting my weight on it. The trapdoor to the cabin was padlocked, but the lock was so corroded it broke off in my hand when I pulled on it. Inside, the cabin was small, maybe 15 by 15 feet, with windows on all sides. The glass was dirty but intact. There was an old metal desk, a wooden chair, a shelf with some moldy Forest Service manuals, and a narrow cot frame with no mattress. Someone had left a plastic tarp, which I figured I could use under my sleeping bag. That first afternoon, I spent hours just looking out the windows, taking in the amazing view. You could see for miles in every direction, rolling blue mountains fading into the distance, patches of dark forest and the glint of a river. I set up my camping stove on the metal desk and made dinner while watching the sunset. It was peaceful. The only sounds were birds, the occasional rustling in the trees below, and the wind creaking through the tower's metal frame. As it got dark, I arranged my sleeping bag on the cot frame, using the tarp and my extra clothes as padding. I read for a while by headlamp, then turned in around 10. The wind had picked up, making the tower sway slightly. It wasn't alarming. I'd stayed in fire towers before and knew they were built to withstand much worse. I fell asleep easily, exhausted from the hike. I woke suddenly at 2:13 in the morning. I remember checking my watch immediately because what woke me was so distinct, a sharp metallic clang from the stairs outside. It sounded exactly like someone had dropped something heavy on the metal steps. My heart was racing as I sat up. The moon was bright enough that I could see clearly around the cabin. Nothing had fallen inside. I listened for several minutes but heard nothing except the wind. Finally, I worked up the courage to open the hatch in the floor and shine my flashlight down the stairs. Nothing, just empty metal steps disappearing into darkness. I told myself it was probably an animal or maybe just the tower settling. I closed the hatch but didn't latch it, figuring I was being paranoid. The next day was completely normal. I hiked around the mountain, taking pictures and exploring some small caves I found about a mile from the tower. The weather was perfect, sunny but not too hot. I picked some blackberries growing wild along the trail and saw a black bear in the distance, which quickly disappeared into the trees. By the time I returned to the tower in late afternoon, I'd almost forgotten about the noise from the night before. That evening, it started to rain. Nothing severe, just a steady summer shower that drummed pleasantly on the metal roof. I cooked my dinner, read my book, and watched lightning flash in the distance. Before turning in, I left my hiking boots outside the hatch at the top of the stairs. They were muddy from the day's exploring, and I didn't want to track dirt into my sleeping area. I distinctly remember latching the hatch from the inside before getting into my sleeping bag around 11. I'm not sure what time it was when I woke up. My watch was on the desk across the room, and it was too dark to see it. What I do remember is the cold. It was July in Tennessee, but the temperature in the cabin had dropped dramatically. I could see my breath in the dim moonlight filtering through the clouds. The rain had stopped, but water was still dripping somewhere. That's when I noticed the hatch was open. Not wide open, just slightly ajar, maybe an inch or two. But I know I had latched it before going to sleep. I lay perfectly still, straining to hear anything over the pounding of my heart. There were no footsteps, no breathing, nothing to indicate someone else was in the cabin with me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Slowly, I turned my head toward the ceiling. There, hanging upside down from one of the rafters, was a figure. It was completely black, not like a person wearing black clothes, but like a three-dimensional shadow. It had a human shape, but no distinguishable features, no face, no eyes that I could see, but somehow I knew it was looking at me. It wasn't moving, just hanging there, about 4 feet above me. I don't remember deciding to move. 1 second I was frozen in terror. The next I was on my feet, scrambling backward until I hit the wall. The figure vanished, not like it ran away or dropped down. It simply wasn't there anymore. No sound, no movement, just gone. I stood there shaking for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Finally, I managed to lunge for my flashlight on the desk. I swept the beam around the cabin, checking every corner, under the desk, the ceiling, nothing. The hatch was still slightly open. With my heart in my throat, I approached it and shined my light down the stairs. Empty. Then I remembered my boots. I'd left them right outside the hatch. They were gone. I sat with my back against the wall until first light, clutching my bear spray and flashlight, jumping at every creak and groan of the tower. As soon as I could see clearly, I packed my gear as fast as possible. I didn't care about the boots. I just needed to get out of there. I climbed down the tower barefoot, the metal steps ice cold against my skin. At the bottom, I searched around, thinking maybe an animal had dragged my boots away. Nothing. No tracks in the mud, no scattered laces or pieces of leather, no sign my boots had ever existed. I put on the thin camp shoes I'd brought as backups and started hiking down the mountain. My feet were blistered and bleeding by the time I reached my car, but I barely noticed the pain. Since that night, I've tried to find any information about strange occurrences at Rich Mountain Tower. I've searched hiking forums, trail reports, even old ranger logs I managed to access through a friend who works for the Forest Service. Nothing that matches what I experienced. The closest I found was a brief note from 1984 about hikers reporting unauthorized occupancy of the tower, but the follow-up report just cited local teenagers as the likely culprits. I never told the rangers about what happened. What would I say? That a shadow person stole my boots? That my dead grandfather's haunted tower had a visitor? I'd sound insane. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was sleepwalking or suffering from altitude sickness, or maybe I just breathed in some weird fungal spores from those moldy manuals. But then I remember the absolute certainty I felt in that moment, the knowledge that something was watching me, had been watching me, perhaps for generations. I don't visit fire towers anymore. I gave my grandfather's journals to a local historical society, claiming I didn't have space for them. I haven't read any of his other entries. I don't want to know if this thing followed him to other places or if it's still out there waiting in that tower for the next visitor who happens to share our blood. Whatever was in that tower that night, I don't think it was after my boots. I think it was sending a message. I knew your grandfather, and now I know you too. Story 17. I've been putting off writing about this for almost a year, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone here has gone through something similar or can at least tell me I'm not crazy for still being terrified of my own house. Last March, my parents got invited to some fancy fundraising dinner downtown. Dad's company sponsored a table, and it was one of those events where they basically had to go. I was 16 at the time and obviously old enough to stay home alone. I'd done it plenty of times before without any issues. The weather forecast had mentioned possible thunderstorms, but nobody expected the absolute monster that rolled in that evening. By 7 o'clock, rain was hammering against the windows like someone was throwing handfuls of pebbles, and the wind was making this awful howling sound through the gaps in our old Victorian house on Maple Street. Our house was built in like 1890-something, and it's got all those charming quirks that really just mean it's drafty and makes weird noises all the time. My parents left around 6 before the storm really kicked in. Mom kept asking if I was sure I'd be okay, and I practically had to push them out the door. I was actually looking forward to having the house to myself, ordering pizza, watching whatever I wanted, typical teenage stuff. Once they left, I decided to watch this horror movie I'd been wanting to see but knew Mom would never approve of. Looking back, that was probably my first mistake. It was about this killer who would break into people's houses and then call them from their own landline. You know, the call is coming from inside the house type of thing. Classic scary movie setup. The storm was getting worse by the minute. Every gust of wind made the house creak and groan. Our electricity flickered a few times, which only added to the creepy atmosphere. I was getting really into the movie. It was at that part where the main character is home alone, just like me, and starting to suspect someone else might be in the house with her. That's when I heard the first noise. It was just a creak from upstairs. Nothing unusual for our house, especially during a storm, but something about it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I paused the movie and listened. For a few seconds, there was nothing but the sound of rain pounding against the roof and windows. I told myself I was being stupid, just getting freaked out because of the movie. To give myself a break, I decided to make some popcorn. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a bag from the pantry, and put it in the microwave. While I was waiting, I scrolled through my phone, trying to distract myself. That's when I heard it again. Distinct creaking sound from upstairs, not the random settling noise our house usually makes. This sounded like weight shifting on the old wooden floorboards, like footsteps. My heart started racing, but I still tried to rationalize it. The storm was making the house do all kinds of weird things. The ancient wood was probably expanding and contracting with the humidity changes. I'd lived here my whole life and knew all the normal sounds our house made, but this wasn't one of them. I took my popcorn back to the living room but couldn't focus on the movie anymore. I kept straining to listen for any other unusual sounds. After about 5 minutes of sitting there frozen with tension, I heard another creak, louder this time, and it was definitely coming from my parents' bedroom directly above the living room. My mouth went completely dry. I tried calling my parents, but the call wouldn't go through, probably because of the storm. I texted them asking when they'd be home, trying to sound casual. No response. I sat there for maybe another 10 minutes, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. But then I heard what sounded like their bedroom door opening. There was no mistaking that specific squeak. It always made that exact same sound. I had to know what was going on. If it was just the house making storm noises, I needed to confirm that so I could stop freaking myself out. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer in the kitchen in case the power went out and started slowly climbing the stairs. Each step I took made the stairs creak beneath me, and I winced at every sound. The upstairs hallway was dark except for a thin line of light seeping out from under my parents' closed bedroom door. Light from under their door. I froze. My parents always turned everything off before they left. Always. My dad was obsessive about it. He'd make us all walk through the house before leaving to make sure nothing was left on. There was absolutely no reason for there to be a light on in their room. As I stood there, paralyzed with indecision, I heard something that made my blood turn to ice, a faint, raspy whisper coming from inside their bedroom. I couldn't make out any words, just the unmistakable cadence of someone speaking very quietly. My first thought was to run, get out of the house immediately. But as I turned to head back to the stairs, I saw something that stopped me dead in my tracks. At the end of the hallway, barely visible in the darkness, was the tall silhouette of a person. They were just standing there, completely still, blocking my path to the stairs. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even scream. The figure took a step toward me, and that broke my paralysis. I bolted in the opposite direction toward my bedroom at the other end of the hall. I slammed the door behind me, locked it, and pushed my desk against it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911 on my phone. When the dispatcher answered, I whispered that someone was in my house. She asked for my address and told me to stay on the line while officers were dispatched. "Find somewhere to hide," she instructed. "Don't make any noise." I told her I was in my bedroom with the door barricaded, but even as we spoke, I heard heavy footsteps in the hallway outside my door. Then a voice, that same raspy whisper but louder now. "Lily, I know you're here." My name. They knew my name. The door handle jiggled, then came a soft knocking. "Lily, open the door. I just want to talk to you." The dispatcher heard everything. "Police are 4 minutes out," she whispered. "Stay hidden, stay quiet. My bedroom has a walk-in closet." I grabbed my phone and flashlight and squeezed behind the hanging clothes, burying myself under a pile of old winter coats. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. The knocking turned into pounding, and I heard the wood of my door starting to splinter. The desk I'd pushed against it scraped across the floor as the intruder pushed against the door. "I'm coming in, Lily. I've been watching you for so long. It's time we finally met." I covered my mouth with my hand to keep from screaming. Tears were streaming down my face. I heard the desk scrape further across the floor and the door finally give way. Heavy footsteps entered my room. I could hear them moving around, checking under the bed, opening drawers. "Playing hide and seek, Lily? That's okay. I've got all night." The closet door opened. Light spilled in from my bedroom. I held my breath and pressed myself further into the corner, praying the pile of coats would keep me hidden. The hangers scraped against the rod as the intruder pushed clothes aside, getting closer to my hiding spot. I could see dirty boots through a small gap between coats. They stopped right in front of me. That's when I heard the front door downstairs slam open and my dad's voice shouting my name. Everything happened so fast after that. The intruder cursed and rushed out of my closet. I heard him running down the hallway. I crawled out from my hiding place and peeked out of my bedroom just in time to see a tall, gaunt man with wild eyes rushing toward the stairs. My dad was coming up the stairs at the same time. They collided, and I saw the glint of a knife in the intruder's hand as he lunged at my dad. I don't know where I found the courage, but I grabbed the heavy metal flashlight and ran toward them. My dad was wrestling with the man, trying to keep the knife away from his face. I swung the flashlight as hard as I could and hit the intruder in the back of the head. He stumbled but didn't go down. He turned toward me, his face twisted with rage, and for a second I thought he was going to kill me right there. But my dad tackled him, and they both tumbled down the stairs. I ran to the top of the stairs and saw them struggling at the bottom. The front door was open, and I could see my mom standing on the porch, talking frantically to someone on her phone. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. The intruder knew it too. He made one last desperate attempt to break free from my dad's grip, but I ran down and grabbed a cast-iron frying pan from the kitchen counter. When he managed to get up, I swung it at him with everything I had. This time, he went down and stayed down. The police arrived seconds later. They handcuffed the man who was still dazed from the blow to his head. As they led him out to the police car, he looked directly at me and smiled. "I'll be back for you, Lily. This isn't over." The police told us the man had been living in our attic. They found a makeshift bed, food wrappers, water bottles, and this is the part that still makes me sick. Dozens of photos of me sleeping, of me getting dressed. of me studying at my desk. He had been watching me through a small hole in my ceiling that I'd never noticed, hidden behind a light fixture. They said he'd probably been there for at least a week, maybe longer. He'd been learning our routines, watching our every move, waiting for the perfect opportunity. And when my parents left that night, he thought it had finally come. The reason my dad came home early was that the storm had caused a power outage downtown and the event had been postponed. If that hadn't happened, it's been almost a year and we moved to a different house 2 months after it happened. I still jump at every creak and noise. I sleep with my bedroom door locked and a chair wedged under the handle. I check my closet every night before bed and sometimes in the middle of the night when I wake up from nightmares. The police said the man had a history of breaking into homes and watching families before attacking them. He's in prison now, but sometimes I still feel like I'm being watched. Like someone's in the ceiling looking down at me through a hole I can't see. I haven't slept in my room with the lights off since that night, and I don't think I ever will again. Story 18. I've debated posting this for almost 2 years now. Part of me wants to forget it ever happened, but I can't shake the feeling that I need to warn others. This happened in the spring of 2021 in a remote section of the Appalachian Mountains. I'm changing some specific location details because honestly, I'm still paranoid. My cousin Jake and I used to hike together all the time growing up. He was the outdoorsy one who got me into hiking in the first place. When we were teenagers, we'd spend entire summers exploring trails. After college, we'd still meet up a few times a year for multi-day hikes. Jake knew the Appalachians better than anyone I'd ever met. He could identify every bird call, every plant, and seemed to have this sixth sense about weather and trail conditions. When Jake died unexpectedly from an aneurysm 3 years ago, it hit me harder than I expected. He was only 32. At his funeral, his wife gave me his favorite compass, the one we'd used on countless trips. I promised myself I'd keep hiking, partly to honor him, partly because it was the one place I still felt connected to him. That spring, I decided to do a solo 3-day trek through a less traveled section of the Appalachians that Jake had always talked about, but we never got around to exploring together. I'd done plenty of solo hikes before, but never in such a remote area. I told myself I was experienced enough, and besides, I'd have Jake's compass with me. I arrived at the trailhead around 9 in the morning. The parking lot was empty except for my Toyota, not surprising for a weekday in the off-season. I double-checked my pack. 3 days of food, first aid kit, extra socks, water filter, tent, sleeping bag, knife, headlamp, map, and Jake's compass. I locked my car, pocketed the keys, and headed out. The first few hours were peaceful. The trail was more overgrown than I expected, but still clearly marked. The weather was perfect, cool but sunny, with a slight breeze keeping the bugs away. I stopped for lunch around noon on a rocky outcrop with a view of the valley below. As I sat there eating my sandwich, I felt calm for the first time in months. That feeling didn't last long. Around 2 in the afternoon, something changed. I can't explain it exactly, but the forest felt different. The birds had gone quiet. The breeze had died down, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I've spent enough time outdoors to know that sometimes your mind plays tricks on you in the wilderness. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that it was probably just the natural anxiety of being alone in an unfamiliar area. I kept hiking, trying to focus on the sound of my boots on the trail and my breathing, but the feeling persisted. Every time I stopped to check my map or take a drink, I'd spin around, convinced I'd catch someone standing behind me. There was never anyone there, but I swear I could feel eyes on my back. Around 4, I came to a fork in the trail. The main path continued straight ahead, but there was a smaller, less defined trail branching off to the right. My map showed this secondary trail looping around and eventually reconnecting with the main path about 3 miles ahead. Jake had always encouraged exploring side trails, saying that's where you find the best views. I decided to take the detour, figuring it might help shake this weird feeling I had. The side trail was much less maintained. In some places, it was barely visible beneath the spring undergrowth. After about half a mile, it started to descend into a small ravine. That's when I heard it, a sharp crack of a branch breaking somewhere behind me. I froze. It could have been anything, a deer, a falling branch, but combined with the feeling I'd had all afternoon, it sent my heart racing. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" My voice sounded small in the dense forest. No response. I picked up my pace, moving faster down the trail. The ravine deepened, and the path followed a small stream. The terrain forced me to slow down and watch my footing on the slippery rocks. Every few minutes I'd stop and listen. A couple of times I thought I heard something moving in the undergrowth, but I couldn't be sure. About a mile from the fork, the trail curved around a large boulder. As I rounded it, I spotted something that stopped me in my tracks. A small clearing just off the path with what looked like a campsite, but not a normal campsite. There was no tent, just a blue tarp strung between trees. Under it was a folding table covered with tools. Even from 20 feet away, I could see knives, ropes, chains, and what looked like handcuffs. Next to the table was a metal cage, like a dog crate, but bigger, big enough for a person. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a hunter's camp. This wasn't a normal hiker's rest stop. This was something else entirely. I backed away slowly, trying not to make a sound. That's when I noticed something else. A second tarp on the ground, partially covered with leaves and dirt, like someone had tried to hide it. One corner had come loose, revealing what looked like dark stains on the underside. I didn't stick around to investigate further. I turned and started moving back up the trail as quickly and quietly as possible. I needed to get back to the main trail, back to where other hikers might be. I'd made it about 100 yards when I heard it. Heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush, coming from the direction of the camp. They weren't trying to be quiet anymore. They knew I'd seen the sight. Pure adrenaline kicked in. I started running, scrambling up the rocky path, my heavy pack throwing off my balance. I slipped on a wet rock and went down hard, scraping my palms and banging my knee. The pain barely registered. I was back on my feet in seconds, moving faster than I thought possible with a full pack. The footsteps behind me were getting closer. I could hear heavy breathing now. I didn't dare look back. I reached the fork where the side trail met the main path and turned onto the wider trail, hoping to find other hikers. The main trail was still empty. I kept running, my lungs burning, sweat pouring down my face despite the cool air. After what felt like forever but was probably only 10 minutes, I spotted a figure ahead on the trail. As I got closer, I nearly cried with relief. It was a park ranger, a middle-aged woman with a radio on her belt. I must have looked terrified because she immediately asked if I was okay. Between gasps for breath, I explained what I'd found and that someone had chased me. She radioed for backup immediately, then had me sit down while she stood watch, her hand resting on her sidearm. Within 30 minutes, 2 more rangers arrived. They took my statement and my map, marking exactly where I thought the campsite was. They advised me to hike back to the trailhead with one of them while the other 2 investigated. The hike back was a blur. The ranger, Dave, tried to keep conversation going to calm me down, but I was barely listening, constantly looking over my shoulder despite his reassurances. When we finally reached the parking lot around 7 in the evening, I discovered something that confirmed my worst fears. All 4 of my car's tires had been slashed, not just punctured but systematically cut open with what must have been a large knife. My car had been the only one in the lot that morning. Whoever had been watching me, whoever had set up that campsite, they'd known my car. They'd made sure I couldn't leave. Dave radioed this in immediately. He stayed with me while we waited for police to arrive. He kept his hand on his gun the entire time, scanning the tree line around the parking lot. The police arrived about 45 minutes later, followed by the other rangers. They hadn't found anyone at the campsite, but confirmed everything I'd seen. The tools, the cage, the tarp with stains that they strongly suspected was blood. They took photographs of my car and filed a report. One of the rangers drove me to the nearest town where I got a hotel room for the night. The next morning, a tow truck came for my car, and I arranged for new tires to be put on. I gave additional statements to both the rangers and local police. They told me they would conduct a thorough search of the area and check missing persons reports from nearby counties. I drove home that afternoon, constantly checking my rearview mirror. In the weeks that followed, I stayed in contact with the lead investigator. They found evidence that the campsite had been used multiple times. They found hair and fibers that didn't match, suggesting multiple victims. But they never found the person responsible. The trail cameras they set up afterward never captured anyone returning to the site. It's been almost 2 years now. I barely hike anymore. When I do, it's only in popular, well-traveled areas close to home, always with a group, never alone. I sold my camping gear. I couldn't bear to look at it. The thing that haunts me most isn't just what I saw, it's how calculated it all was. The campsite was set up in a location just off a lesser-known side trail, where hikers would rarely venture. My car was disabled to prevent escape. This wasn't some random, opportunistic predator. This was someone who had a system, who had done this before and would likely do it again. Sometimes I wonder if Jake's compass saved my life that day. If something made me take that side trail instead of continuing on the main path where I might have been ambushed later in an even more remote location. I still feel watched sometimes, even in crowded places. I've moved twice since then. I don't post on social media anymore. I've told very few people this story. If you hike in the Appalachians, especially alone, please be careful. There's something out there in those mountains, something worse than bears or snakes or getting lost, something that hunts.